evolving my Undead Legion in a game-like World Chapter 921 leverage. Soon, Michael received a mental message from Jester. He was done digesting the memories of the rank 4 demonic supernatural. A hint of anticipation rose within him. Without hesitation, Michael disappeared and reappeared beside Jester. His gaze immediately fell on the frozen body of the old man. Since the man's consciousness had been erased, the old man should now be nothing more than a shell. Michael observed him for a moment longer before finally turning his attention to Jester. "You took your time this time," he said calmly. Jester inclined his head slightly. "It could not be helped, Master." His gaze remained steady as he continued. "Unlike the previous demonic supernatural, who was at most comparable to me in strength, this individual far surpassed me. Even in a defenseless state, the difference was vast." Michael's expression did not change, but he listened closely. "There were multiple layers of mental defenses that needed to be broken down," Jester added. "Even after that, the volume of memories alone was immense." He paused briefly before continuing. Ordinary memories were not the issue. However, the supernatural knowledge he possessed required far more time to process and stabilize. "This individual had also reached the 3rd layer of the void," he said calmly. "In terms of actual existence, he is far older than what his time in Aurora suggests. His accumulated memories span more than a century." "I see," Michael said quietly. Michael now understood why Jester had taken hours this time compared to before. A rank 4 supernatural was indeed still a rank 4 supernatural, even if unconscious. Michael's gaze lingered on the old man's body for a moment longer. "The 3rd layer of the void," he muttered inwardly. He also understood what that meant. The void was not a single place. It had layers. 3 to be exact. The first layer was the surface layer. It was the closest to the material world, where the boundary between both sides was thin. In that layer, one could still influence the material world from the void and vice versa. The second layer went deeper. At that point, one had completely left the material world, but not the plane itself. It was still tied to the same realm. Then came the 3rd layer. The moment one entered it, they had completely left the plane of their world. It was no longer just the void tied to Aurora. It was the void connected to the universe. For Michael, the easiest way to understand it was simple. The 3rd layer was like space. Not empty, not silent, and definitely not safe. Just vast and supernatural. Within it, there were other realms, unknown territories, strange creatures, and countless hidden treasures waiting for those fortunate enough to find them. But it was also dangerous beyond reason. Time itself did not flow normally there. Depending on where one was, 10 years in the void could pass as a single month in Aurora. Or the opposite. Because of this, anyone who had traveled through the void, even briefly, was often far older than they appeared. If Michael ever entered the void, he would have to measure his life in 2 ways. His true age, and his Aurora age. The age he would have been if he had never left. To be honest, Michael felt that time was not far off. After all, he was also a rank 3 supernatural who could now use spatial powers. As long as he wanted progress for his physical body, he would eventually need to leave. Of course not permanently, but a few travels here and there were inevitable. Michael finally turned fully toward Jester. "So," he started, unable to hide a trace of expectation. "What did we actually get from him?" Jester's expression remained calm, but his next words made Michael's attention sharpen immediately. "This time, Master will be satisfied." Michael raised a brow. That alone was enough to stir his anticipation. "Further." "What?" Michael asked. "Did the old man have a treasure vault?" "Yes," Jester replied without delay. "A few, in fact. However, retrieving what is inside will require effort. They are not simple locations, and some are protected by methods beyond ordinary means." Michael was not surprised by that. The other party had been a realm above him. Anything related to a rank 4 demonic supernatural was bound to be troublesome. But treasure was still treasure. And Michael, who was eternally greedy when money was involved, felt a fresh surge of energy run through him. Before he could ask more, Jester continued. That is not all. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. Compared to the previous one, this man was a core member. Because of that, he knew much more. Now Michael's full attention was fixed on him. Jester continued. Outside our country, he knew at least 20% of the major demonic hideouts. Inside our country, the number is greater than 50%. For a brief second, Michael went still. Only then did the true value of what had landed in his hands settle properly in his mind. This was no longer just simple information. This was a knife aimed directly at the hidden body of the demonic faction. Michael's breathing slowed slightly as his thoughts accelerated. If this was true, then even without acting personally, this knowledge alone could reshape how the Federation, the Academy, or other major powers moved against the demonic faction. There were many possibilities available to Michael. His gaze drifted briefly toward the old man's frozen shell. This was valuable information, and now all that value sat in Jester's hands. To be honest, Michael could not deny it. The longer Jester remained by his side, the more terrifying his usefulness became. He should pay more attention on Jester abilities and how to better utilize them himself. Michael exhaled softly. Good, he said at last, though the word felt too small for what he was actually thinking. Very good. Because now, for the first time since the demonic faction made his family a target, Michael felt that what he held in his hands was not just anger or hatred. It was leverage. Chapter 9:22. Evolving Jester 1. Michael's gaze remained on the frozen body, but his thoughts had already moved far ahead. Now the question was simple: what could he actually do with it? At first, several possibilities flashed through his mind. In the end, it returned to the same conclusion he had reached before, though unlike before, this level of information was too large and too dangerous to act on alone. This wasn't Michael being too cautious. The whole demonic faction wasn't something Michael could afford to offend. Even with the hatred in his heart, he was still self-aware of where his power stood. Even if he wanted to act alone, he could not cover everything. And acting recklessly might only alert the demonic faction instead. The best option was still the Academy. Or more precisely, the Federation and the Academy. If this information was handed over, it would not just result in 1 or 2 victories. Could shift the entire situation. I'll give it to them, Michael decided. However, there was still one issue. The source of this information. If they asked where he got it from, what would he say? Michael's gaze flickered slightly. Jester and the old man could not be exposed, but compared to the benefits this information could bring, that problem was minor. There were ways to avoid answering directly, or to give a partial truth. Michael did not dwell on it too much. Instead, his thoughts shifted to something more immediate. It was time to power Jester up. In the limited space he could afford in the coffin, Michael created a small gathering with him and Jester in it. Now that it was finally time to evolve his undead was when Michael actually realized this would be the first time for Jester. Then again, it wasn't surprising. There was a reason Jester wasn't any less important than his other undead, because compared to all of them that were evolved with his talent, Jester was a natural extraordinary grade creature from the start. And the highest grade too. Basically, this meant the next evolution form for Jester was epic grade. Michael considered his own current form at this grade, and when he had wanted to evolve the last time he needed as many as 1,500 evolution points, which was 15 times the amount he needed to evolve to a high human. Though his evolution just made him more of an evolved high human than changed him to a new race, it should be different for monsters or creatures like Jester and the rest. Even before looking at the points needed to evolve Jester, it was going to be a huge amount. Michael quickly ran through the numbers in his head. The system of evolution was simple in structure, but the cost scaled sharply with each step. To begin with, evolving a 1-star common creature to 3-star common required only 1 evolution point. This was the most basic stage, almost negligible now. From there, advancing into the next grade took 5 evolution points to move from 3-star common to 1-star rare. Once within the rare grade, the scaling continued. To evolve from 1-star rare to 3-star rare, the cost increased again by 5 times. That meant 25 evolution points. Breaking into the extraordinary grade required another fivefold increase. From 3-star rare to 1-star extraordinary, the cost rose to 125 evolution points. From 1-star extraordinary to 3-star extraordinary, it required 625 evolution points. Michael had more than 2,000 3-star extraordinary grade creatures, meaning to reach this number his talent had generated at least more than 1,000,000 evolution points. No wonder he was in serious student debt to the academy, and this was after almost exhausting his territory's raw material reserves back in the land of Oregon, hunting monsters in the Everlong Forest, and devouring all the law seeds he had after studying them. Thanks to his current number of undead, Michael was getting at least 2,000 evolution points a day, but to accumulate it to 1,000,000 he would need at least 500 days, which was already more than a year. No wonder they said that as one grew in power, it became incredibly hard to progress. If he relied solely on natural accumulation, his progress would be painfully slow. Fortunately, the current stage was still sufficient for him. If others knew of Michael's thoughts now, they would not care whether they could beat him or not before trying it out. As several thoughts flashed through Michael's mind, he finally saw the amount of points needed to evolve Jester and sucked in a deep breath. Do you want to use 9,375 evolution points to evolve Jester to 1-star epic grade? 9,000! Though he had suspected the amount would be 15 times like his own, Michael was still shocked, and he turned to look at the thousands of undead around him as his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. To this day, he still wondered why the evolutions of intelligent creatures and monsters were calculated differently. The first thought that came to Michael was that being a Viscount was now insufficient. At this rate of consumption, he would need to be a king or emperor to have the resources to fund his future endeavors. Of course, Michael could also go and hunt in hell if he wasn't afraid of the risks. Putting aside the points needed to evolve Jester, it was almost certain that the same thing that had happened during his own last evolution might potentially happen to Jester. Fortunately, Jester did not have a primary and secondary body like Michael, so his main body could be evolved inside the damaged coffin of the Forgotten. Just as Michael was about to evolve Jester, he noticed something else. Aside from evolving Jester, his talent had given him another option. Merge Jester and Pseudo-Divine Clone for 1,000 evolution points. Yes, merge was also another function of his talent. He actually didn't know he could merge his body with Jester, or more accurately, hadn't thought in that direction, but after a quick thought it made sense. Michael could already imagine that if he were to take this option, the slight difference between his clone body and Jester, in that Jester just functioned as the brain, would disappear and they would become one. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 923. Evolving Jester 2. However, as attractive as the option was, Michael knew this wasn't the time for that yet. Though Michael had complete control over Jester and Jester would do whatever he wanted, Michael was interested in the plan this unique undead had for itself. He knew that Jester had wanted his clone body not just for convenience, like being able to move around more effectively, but also because of the potential it held. There were many reasons, but thanks to the influence of Liang, Jester had settled on a cultivation path that belonged to a realm far stronger than Aurora by many points. Michael did not have anything against this, since the clone was partly a failure and couldn't handle his consciousness well. Now, merging this specially cultivated body with Jester's main body would likely not change its foundation, but evolving it would, because if Jester and the body were one whole entity, evolving it would mean giving it a law. For this, Michael was a bit confused, because it seemed like Jester had a way to not only comprehend its own law but to comprehend one for the clone body as well. Michael was not sure how possible that was, but this was the supernatural world. If something was not possible, it was only because certain conditions had yet to be met. Michael wasn't sure if Jester would succeed, but if anybody had a chance, then Jester was one of them. From what Michael could see, Jester's main focus was on the clone body rather than its own for some reason, so getting a law directly from evolution wouldn't be a problem. Jester had said this itself in its own words. It wasn't that Michael was treating his undead's opinion as his own thoughts, but he was more curious about what would happen if he merged a rank 3 clone of his own with a rank 3 Jester. Michael didn't know what to expect, but he felt he was heading down the rabbit hole of making Jester an even more taboo existence than it already was. After making his decision, Michael gave a simple command. Separate. There was no hesitation from Jester. The clone's body stiffened for a brief moment, then a wet tearing sound echoed in the confined space. A bloody hole suddenly opened at the top of the clone's head. It wasn't a clean split. Flesh peeled back. Bone cracked. Dark blood spilled out in uneven streams, sliding down the face of the motionless body. For a fraction of a second, nothing else happened. Then something moved. A ball of flesh forced its way out from within the opening and leapt out. Michael didn't flinch. He caught it midair. The impact was light, but the sensation was warm. The flesh shifted slightly in his palm. This was Jester's true body. Michael paid attention to the clone body and saw the open wound was already closing. He wondered if his original body could do that too. He felt it could be even stronger, but he had no intention of having a hole in his head. Michael made his decision. The merge option was tempting, but not now. There were too many unknowns, and Jester clearly had his own plans regarding the clone body and the path he was taking. For now, interfering would only disrupt something that might grow into something far more valuable in the future. Without wasting time, he stepped into an open space within the coffin and placed Jester down. Then he connected with his talent. Immediately, Michael's accumulated evolution points dropped sharply. More than 9,000 vanished in an instant. Yet nothing happened. Jester remained exactly the same. No transformation. No search. No change. Michael's eyes narrowed. A bad feeling rose in his chest. There was only one situation where advancement would be paused like this. Universe blessing, he muttered. That was the only explanation. Some advancements could not be completed in the coffin. They required acknowledgement. They required the heavens, which meant they could not happen inside the damaged coffin of the forgotten. Jester tilted his head slightly as he shared his feeling with Michael. Master, something is trying to descend, he said. But it is being blocked. This space is preventing it. Michael exhaled slowly. That's expected, he replied. Your evolution requires something external. It can't happen here, but at the same time I'm almost sure you would draw far too much attention. Michael had been unconscious when he evolved the last time, so he was ignorant of many things, but even the normal evolution effect would be attention-grabbing. Jester understood immediately. Then the concern is concealment, he said calmly. Michael did not deny it. That was exactly the problem. Before he could think further, a surge of foreign information entered his mind. Jester had used memory infusion. Michael could have resisted, but he didn't. He knew Jester wouldn't harm him, so he accepted it. It was a technique, darkness-based, obtained from the old man's memories. It required corpses as a medium, but in exchange it offered strong concealment. Michael absorbed it quickly. His expression eased slightly. This will work, he said, thinking of his class effect and a particular title effect. Jester nodded. We can also receive the blessing in the second layer of the void, he added. It is closer to the heavens than the material world. Michael considered it. That option was even better. With a plan in place, Michael didn't hesitate and left the coffin. The city was currently filled with corpses, so taking a few from the gathering grounds didn't alert anyone, especially since Michael had concealed himself carefully. Immediately after, Michael entered the second layer of the void after a bit of effort. It was his first time after all, but he had a bit of experience thanks to a certain elder who was a kidnapper in his free time. Chapter 9:24. Evolving Jester 3. In the second layer of the void, filled with nothing but darkness, Michael placed the several monster corpses he had gathered from the chaos outside in positions based on the memory Jester had infused into his mind. The name of the technique surfaced clearly in Michael's mind. Shroud of the Silent Dead. It was a concealment method that used corpses as anchors to distort perception. It made the senses register anything the user of the technique desired as dead, like how inanimate objects had no life, or how the air itself was empty. That was what the technique achieved. It was also a gradeless technique, meaning its effect depended entirely on the user's means. For this operation, Michael made sure the main anchors were all rank 3 corpses. Gathering them had not taken much effort, but to avoid detection he only took one from here and there, By the time the Supers Association noticed, it would no longer be his concern. Most likely they would suspect him if they crossed out the involvement of demonic supernaturals, since he was, after all, a necromancer and the only one who would want to use corpses for anything in the area. But Michael didn't particularly care. After all, he was the one who had killed them. Shouldn't he be able to do whatever he wanted with them? He didn't like attention, but for things like this Michael didn't shy away from it. Without wasting time, Michael activated the technique once the preparations were complete. The moment he did, a dull gray fog began to spread outward, expanding steadily and swallowing the surroundings in silence. From where Michael stood, all he could see was gray fog in front of him, but when he extended his senses outward there was nothing. It was as if the area the fog covered had been cut out of existence. Impressive. This wasn't something a normal technique could achieve, as expected of one of the tools a rank 4 supernatural held. Though given the old man's line of business, this technique had probably not been used for good things. In any case, Michael could already tell that after Jester evolved, he would need to have him imprint more techniques like this. Jester had done the same during the case of Liang, and now that they were at a higher level of power, the knowledge of the old man had come at the right time. Of course, Michael could simply request the entire memory too, rather than just the techniques, but that came with risks. Jester's methods were not exactly unique in the supernatural world. It was just that anything capable of achieving a similar effect existed in the gray area at the very least, because it could cause harm not only to the target but to the user as well. Foreign memories were not harmless. They could interfere with the user's own thoughts, blurring identity. At worst, they could overwrite parts of who someone was. Even if not completely, subtle changes could accumulate over time. This was why, even when dealing with the evil cultivator Liang's memories, Michael had avoided direct memory assimilation. What he took was filtered knowledge. Perhaps only something like Jester, a mind-based existence, would truly benefit from consuming such things whole. Looking at the gray fog that gradually began to turn black, mixing with the darkness of the void, Michael knew the effect of his new class, Death Air, was already in play. Perhaps it had been in play from the very beginning and the darkening color was just an after effect, since Michael's senses toward the gray fog didn't register anything particularly different with the color change. Class effect. Enhances all death and dark-related abilities by 50%. Shroud of the Silent Dead happened to fit the bill for this class passive to take effect. Michael no longer hesitated. With everything prepared, he stepped forward and entered the gray fog. The moment he crossed into it, the world seemed to dim even further. Even the flow of mana around him became muted. Without wasting time, Michael released Jester. The moment Jester left his hand, light erupted. A sharp, piercing glow burst out from the mass of flesh, expanding rapidly. At the same time, mana surged from all directions. The surrounding mana began to converge toward Jester in a frenzy, twisting and compressing as it formed a vortex centered on him. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. Sensing the intensity, he didn't stay close. He stepped back and exited the fog. Outside, he paused to check the concealment effect. Even from beyond it, he could still faintly see what was happening within, but it was subtle. Compared to what he had just witnessed inside, the outside reaction was almost negligible. Michael couldn't help but feel a hint of surprise. This technique, even this level of disturbance, had been suppressed to such an extent. If someone wasn't specifically paying attention, they might not even notice anything unusual. After a brief observation, Michael stepped back into the fog. Inside, everything was different. The light had intensified. Mana continued to spiral inward violently, forming layers upon layers of condensed energy around Jester. Michael extended his senses and tried to connect. Jester. No response. Jester. Still nothing. Michael wasn't surprised. When he had last evolved, he had been completely unconscious for more than 2 days. If Jester followed the same pattern, this would take time. Michael didn't disturb him further and continued to observe. Soon something changed. Around Jester, runes began to appear. At first there were only a few, then more followed. One after another, glowing symbols manifested in the air, circling Jester slowly, and as more of them appeared, Michael felt a subtle shift within himself. His comprehension seemed to have increased. He wasn't trying to understand anything yet, but concepts he had thought about before felt clearer. His thoughts moved faster as connections formed more easily. It was as if just standing there was enough to benefit from the process. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 925. Successful Evolution. Michael wasn't particularly surprised by this. After obtaining the Eye of Truth, whenever Michael evolved his undead, he sometimes used it on them, and though he didn't understand many things that happened during that time, he still benefited in several areas. Michael tried to do the same again, but what he saw with the Eye of Truth made him feel like he was staring at letters appearing in a foreign language. His mana was also draining fast, which eventually made Michael give up for now. At the same time, a thoughtful expression appeared on his face. He recalled that, when he last evolved, dozens of monsters had appeared around him because they sensed him as a treasure, and Prince and Lucky had been noticeably stronger than he had left them by the time he woke up. A thought quickly formed in Michael's mind. He summoned Beginning from the damaged coffin of the Forgotten and had it stay close to Jester. The moment Beginning arrived, its eyes opened, and for the first time Michael saw something resembling confusion from Beginning, who immediately closed his eyes again as Michael sensed the pressure around Beginning subtly begin to increase. Seeing this, Michael immediately released more undead into the restricted space the black fog could contain. To be honest, Beginning was the only undead who would benefit more from this, since Michael could simply evolve his other undead who weren't at the peak yet to the next rank. However, something that hadn't changed since he first discovered the use of his talent was that the stronger the undead before evolution, the stronger it was after. In any case, there was no disadvantage to his current actions, so it was better than nothing. Like that, time passed in a blur. 1 hour, 2, 4, 12. Then it turned to a day. Then it became 2 days. By the third day, to cover the increasing effect of Jester's evolution, Michael had to borrow more corpses to cast Shroud of the Silent Dead multiple times around the area. At this point, many of Michael's undead were at the peak of rank 3. Ghost, Fade, Prince, Lucky, Spartan, and many more now only needed a bit of enlightenment to begin the next stage, or to have Michael evolve them directly. Then there was Beginning. By the end of the second day, it seemed Jester's evolution could help him no further. In the damaged coffin of the Forgotten, Michael looked at the 60-meter-tall Beginning with an odd expression on his face. Thinking something over, he then turned to look at Lily, who was a distance away, and a determined look came to Michael's face. Yes, Beginning had also warranted the heaven's gaze. When this appeared, Michael was frustrated. He wanted to finally have a rank 4 undead of his own so he could stop being cautious. If he had one, he would dare to evolve his undead on the higher floors of hell. Thinking on this, Michael revisited another idea he had pushed to the back of his mind, which was to evolve his undead in the land of origin. These days the kingdom and the others around it were in a tense state thanks to the disappearance of Prince Rouet. Though he was far from the capital now, Michael knew this much, and as the culprit he wanted to keep a low profile. Even so, the only reason he feared the Empire was because he lacked rank 4 power of his own. He just needed at least 2 rank 4 undead. Together with his other undead. By then it wouldn't be him being wary of the Empire. It would be the Empire being wary of him. At this point Michael had made his decision. Of course this would come after he had tried to revive the dead rank 4 old man and the Drake following Jester's evolution. As several thoughts flashed through Michael's mind, finally on the third day Jester finished his evolution. The void shifted, tearing open into a vast starry sky that didn't belong to the void. Michael's eyes narrowed. What is this? The stars pulsed, and threads of pale light began to descend, passing through the fog without resistance. The moment the light touched Jester, the surrounding mana surged violently, compressing further as his aura rose sharply and climbed upward. At the same time, the nearby undead reacted. Ghost, Fade, Prince, Lucky, Spartan. Their auras trembled as the light brushed past them. It refined their energy slightly, stabilizing their foundations, but the effect was limited. They had already reached the peak, and this opportunity wasn't for them. Michael watched in silence. Soon a long-awaited notification appeared in front of him. Your undead jester has evolved to epic grade, Undead Valeth. Your Undead Valeth has advanced to rank 3. Your Undead Valeth has leveled up. Your Undead Valeth has leveled up. Your Undead Valeth has leveled up. Your Undead Valeth has leveled up to level 68. More panels began to appear, and this time they were skill-related. However, a quick glance showed they were things Jester had learned to do before, but there were two that immediately caught Michael's attention. Your Undead Jester has acquired a new skill. Skill: Thought Seed. Description: plants an almost undetectable seed within a target's consciousness. As long as the target is not more than one rank higher than the caster, the seed slowly integrates with the target's mind. Over time, thoughts, decisions, and even identity may begin to shift in subtle ways that appear natural to the host. Once fully rooted, the seed cannot be removed without destroying the entire mental structure. Your Undead Jester has acquired a new skill. Skill: Profaned Fate Thread. Description: allows the user to perceive and latch onto the threads of fate connected to a target. Once grasped, outcomes are no longer merely observed but influenced. Minor events may shift subtly, while major outcomes require time, preparation, or sacrifice. Repeated interference carries risks entanglement. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 926. Changes. The moment the final panel faded, Michael didn't linger long in the void. He only spared the notifications a brief glance before moving immediately. With a thought, he recalled his undead. One after another, their presences vanished from the gray fog. But Michael didn't stop there. He also cleared traces of his presence in the void. He didn't do this for any particularly deep reason. It was more like instinctively wiping down a table after a meal. After clearing any traces of himself and his undead from that layer, Michael didn't stay any longer. With a single step, space distorted around him, and in the next moment he was gone. Back in the material world, inside his home, Michael reappeared quietly in the living room. The shift between realms was smooth. Lily and Aunt Mia were still asleep, though he expected them to wake soon since dawn was only a few hours away. The house was silent and unchanged, as if the chaos of the past few days had never reached this place. Michael settled onto the couch and a small object appeared in his hand. It was Jester, or, to refer to his new race properly, a Valeth. Michael lowered his gaze to the small mass resting in his palm. It no longer looked the way it had before. What sat in his hand was unmistakably a brain, yet not one that belonged to anything human. It was also smaller than a human brain, its surface smooth yet layered with intricate folds that seemed too deliberate to be purely biological. There was a strange balance to it, a strange beauty as well. Faint patterns traced across its surface. Michael recognized them immediately as runes. A dull golden glow lingered along those markings, not bright enough to illuminate the room but just enough to make them stand out against the pale, almost lifeless flesh. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly as he observed it more closely. So this is epic grade. If you weren't undead, your glow would probably light up the whole house, he muttered. He closed his fingers slightly around it. The flesh responded faintly, shifting almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging his presence. Then a calm voice echoed in his mind. Master. Michael's gaze stilled. Jester. How do you feel? Michael asked. There were many things a panel could display, but only the individual themselves could truly understand their own condition. Jester's voice remained as calm as ever. Better, Master. Much better. Then after a brief pause he added, Your prowess are as expected magnificent. To be able to possess abilities so divine before the heavens themselves. Truly, this servant is fortunate beyond measure. Michael stared at him. Then the lines appeared across his forehead. Where did you learn flattery from? Jester answered without hesitation. From the political dramas Lily watches with me. Michael fell silent for a second. You watch political dramas? Yes, Master. With Lily? Yes, Master. Michael felt that if he kept asking questions, he would only hear things he wasn't prepared for. In the end, he let it go. "Forget it," he muttered. Jester naturally obeyed and shifted the topic back to himself. "My changes are significant. The first is mobility. At rank 3, flight becomes possible. I also have the ability to move through space, so unlike before where I needed to inhabit a body, my current state can be considered whole and self-sufficient. Though I have no intention of abandoning the body gifted to me by Master." Ignoring the last part, Michael nodded slightly. That much was expected. "The second is my senses," Jester continued. "My natural detection range is now 80,000 meters. That made Michael's brows rise. 80,000. That number was not small. Michael himself could reach that level if he deliberately stretched his senses, but his natural resting range was only 50,000 meters. For Jester to exceed him there immediately after evolving was enough to show just how abnormal the new race was. "I also gained several new skills," Jester said. "Most are refinements of abilities I already possessed. Not entirely new in concept, but remolded into stronger and more complete forms. My weaknesses at this rank are few." He paused before adding in an even tone. "As long as I am dealing with beings that possess a mind or some form of consciousness, aside from Master, there is likely no one at the same rank who can stand against me." Michael was genuinely impressed. "Still," he said, "that sounds a bit arrogant." "I am only stating what I perceive, Master," Jester replied. Michael didn't dismiss it. He believed there was truth in those words. But even so, he still found the claim somewhat excessive. A newly advanced creature declaring near invincibility within the same rank was not something Michael could simply accept at face value. What Michael failed to consider was that he himself was an anomaly, and he was still 3 levels below Jester within the same rank. Considering that, perhaps Jester's words were not as exaggerated as they sounded. Michael let that matter rest and shifted to what actually mattered most. At rank 3, skills, senses, and mobility all played a role, but none of them were the true dividing line. The real difference between a creature at this stage and one below it was the presence of a law. That was the foundation. That was what truly made rank 3 a higher realm. "And your law?" Michael asked. "Law of heavenly revelation." Michael's brows rose immediately. For the first time since Jester finished evolving, genuine surprise appeared clearly on his face. Heavenly revelation? That was not what he had expected. It sounded grand. Too grand, even. More importantly, it did not sound like a law tied purely to the mind. It sounded considerably broader than that. Jester's voice remained calm. "Yes, Master. That is the name of my law." Michael fell silent. Law of heavenly revelation. He couldn't help thinking of one particular skill panel that had appeared earlier. Skill. Profaned Fate Thread. Description. Allows the user to perceive and latch onto the threads of fate connected to a target. Once grasped, outcomes are no longer merely observed but influenced. Minor events may shift subtly, while major outcomes require time, preparation, or sacrifice. Repeated interference carries risks of entanglement. Michael couldn't help but wonder, was Jester somehow drifting away from purely mind-related abilities? Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 927. Law of Heavenly Revelation. After being revived by his master, Jester couldn't remember much of his past. His memories were fragmented, incomplete, like torn pages scattered across a void he could no longer reach. All he truly knew, what remained clear and undeniable, was that his master was the closest existence in the world to him. Even after becoming undead, it didn't dull Jester's senses. If anything, his awareness had sharpened. And because of that, he could sense it. His master disliked him. Not openly, not with hostility, but there was a distance, a faint rejection buried beneath indifference. To any other being it might have gone unnoticed. But Jester saw it clearly. Yet, as a creature governed by logic, he could not understand why. He had done nothing wrong. He existed for his master. Everything he was, everything he could become, belonged to that one figure. By all reason, there should have been no flaw in his existence. But still, the distance remained. Even so, it didn't change anything. Jester loved his master. Not out of emotion, not in the way humans understood it, but in the only way he could define it. Absolute recognition of importance. His master was also special. Not simply because he was his master, but because he was genuinely, fundamentally special. There was something about him. Something different at a level that defied easy explanation. His master could change the nature of things. Not metaphorically, but at a deeper level, something that contradicted the very structure of existence itself. Jester had always wondered if this was normal. It wasn't until he devoured the memories of Li Yuan that he finally understood the truth. It was not normal. Not even among cultivators, who counted among the most powerful beings in the world. His master was abnormal. Unique. Jester couldn't help but wonder when his master would evolve him. Time passed. He watched. One by one, his brothers and sisters proved their usefulness. They fought. They grew. They stood beside their master and carved their place at his side. And Jester remained a mass of flesh. He wanted to do more. He needed to do more. Fortunately, the opportunity came. When his master created a clone, his master viewed it as a failure. To Jester, it was a gift. But even after gaining a body, his master did not keep him close. Instead, he was placed far away, entrusted with something else entirely. His master's family. Jester did not understand it at first. He believed, logically, that he could be of far greater use at his master's side. If his master invested in him, refined him, evolved him, his value would increase well beyond what it currently was. But since it was an order, Jester obeyed. Time moved forward, and slowly he began to understand. His master was not lacking power. He was not lacking capable subordinates either. Among his many siblings were beings just as special as himself. Some were even more suited for direct combat, for destruction, for standing at the forefront of whatever came. Jester was not the only one, and so he found his place. If he could not serve his master on the front lines, then he would serve him from the shadows. Just as protecting the family allowed his master to act without restraint, Jester would become that unseen support. The silent guardian. The one who ensured that everything behind his master remained stable. An unshakable foundation. But to do that, he needed to grow stronger. And then, 3 days ago, the opportunity finally came. His master had decided to evolve him. Jester did not know what he was thinking at that moment. There were no emotions guiding him. No sudden enlightenment. No grand realization like those recorded in the memories of cultivators who spoke of epiphanies beneath the heavens. There was only one thing. A goal. To become useful to his master. To reach a state where his existence would no longer be lacking. And under his master's blessing, something changed. That singular obsession, pure and untainted by distraction, condensed. It evolved. It gave birth to something greater. A law born from calculation, from observation, from countless silent analyses of cause and effect, from watching, waiting, and determining the most optimal path forward. A law that did not seek to fight fate, but to read it, to dissect it, to use it. The law of heavenly revelation. At its core, it was not a power-oriented law. It was a law that allowed the unseen to be seen, but not in the crude sense of perception, not merely sensing danger or predicting attacks. This law touched something deeper. Fate. To most beings, fate was abstract. A vague concept used to explain coincidence, destiny, or inevitability. Even among powerful cultivators, fate was something only the highest tiers could barely glimpse. But Jester's law treated fate differently. To him, fate was structure. It was a network. Connections extending from every being, every action, every possible outcome. Invisible lines that dictated probability, possibility, and direction. And through the law of heavenly revelation, Jester could see them. Law of heavenly revelation. A law that allows its user to perceive the hidden structure of fate as an interconnected web of possibilities. Through this, the user can analyze how events, choices, and outcomes are linked, enabling accurate foresight. By applying calculation and precise control, the user can subtly influence these pathways, guiding events toward desired results while remaining within the natural flow and constraints of destiny. Jester was satisfied with this law, not because it was powerful in a direct sense, but because it was perfect for him. He had never been a being meant for brute force. Even at his peak, his strength had always come from understanding rather than destruction. This law did not force him to change that nature. Instead, it refined it. It gave structure to the way he already existed. More importantly, it aligned with his purpose. Jester did not need to stand beside his master on the battlefield. He did not need to be the strongest. As long as he could see the paths ahead, his value would not be inferior to any of his siblings. In fact, it might surpass them. Because while strength could destroy enemies, control could prevent them from ever becoming threats in the first place. Jester no longer questioned his place. He had found it, not at the front, not at the center, but everywhere, in every choice, in every possibility, in every unseen thread guiding the future forward. And in that quiet, precise domain, Jester was content. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 928. Fate 1. After hearing the details of Jester's law, Michael was almost certain Jester was shifting away from being solely a mind-controlling creature towards something fate-based. He didn't know how that would play out in the future, but he had his expectations. After all, the law of heavenly revelation sounded genuinely impressive. Based on Jester's choice of words, it was clear he was satisfied with it too. Still, Michael couldn't help feeling curious about how the law could actually be applied. It was fate-related, after all. The mystery surrounding it stirred something deep in him. Why don't we try using your law a bit to better understand it? As Jester's master, this was his right and responsibility. Only Michael knew this was really just his curiosity pushing through. Jester did not hesitate. As master wishes. There was no resistance in his tone. Though the knowledge of his law existed within him, it was still just knowledge. Even if Michael had not suggested it, Jester would have tested it in private eventually. Practical experience was necessary. The faint golden runes etched across Jester's surface began to glow slightly brighter. My law requires a reference point, Jester began. A target, to be precise. Fate cannot be observed in isolation. It must be anchored to something. Michael nodded slightly. That makes sense. To allow Master to better understand, I request permission to connect to your senses. Michael didn't hesitate. Do it. The moment he agreed, a subtle shift occurred. It felt less like something new and more like an additional layer had been placed over his existing perception. His vision remained the same, but something else overlapped it. The sensation reminded Michael of a skill he hadn't used in some time, the one that allowed him to share senses with his undead. As that brief nostalgia passed, the world around him expanded through Jester's perspective. Michael's senses stretched outward rapidly, far beyond his usual range. Streets, buildings, distant figures, movement across the entire city. Everything within 80,000 meters became perceivable at once. Interesting, Michael muttered. Within that vast field of perception, countless targets appeared. Ordinary people, awakeners, some loose creatures still roaming the aftermath. Though dawn had barely begun to approach, there was movement everywhere. Jester's voice followed calmly. We will select a simple target. Michael didn't object. Within that massive field, Jester filtered through countless presences with a precision that bordered on unsettling before finally settling on one. They will suffice. Michael's perception shifted focus. Under a building some distance away, two ordinary Supers Association staff members stood in partial cover, speaking quietly to each other. Their voices were low, tired, and rough from exhaustion. But through Jester's senses, Michael heard them with unnatural clarity, as though he were standing only a few steps away rather than tens of thousands of meters distant. I really thought I was going to die back there, one of them said, letting out a shaky breath. He was leaning against the wall, one hand pressed to his side. When those things came out of the cracks, I honestly thought that was it. The other gave a bitter laugh. You weren't the only one. He lowered himself onto a broken slab of concrete and rubbed his face hard, as if trying to push away the lingering fear. Fortunately, those strong individuals appeared. If not for them, Brightgate would have been finished. Us too. The other fell silent for a moment before speaking again. When I graduated from the Cultivation Academy and chose to work for the Supers Association instead of going to the front line with the Federation soldiers. He let out a dry breath. Almost dying in my own city wasn't exactly part of the plan. The first one gave a weak snort. That's because you were naive. Maybe. In the end, the world was never truly safe. His tone turned quieter. Whether you hide in a city, join the association, or go to the front line, danger is danger. The only real protection anyone has is their own strength. The other man didn't argue. After a moment, he nodded faintly. At least we're still better off than ordinary people. They couldn't even defend themselves. Michael listened from the living room, his expression turning slightly odd. The clarity of it all surprised him. Not the words themselves, but everything surrounding the people saying them. Their breathing, the rhythm of their heartbeats, the slight tremble of lingering fear still present in their voices. Even the scrape of cloth when one of them adjusted his sleeve reached him with perfect precision. It was absurd. This wasn't merely enhanced hearing. It was closer to direct interception of everything happening around a target, regardless of distance. Michael couldn't help feeling impressed. Even if Jester's current use of his law couldn't yet produce anything spectacular in direct application, this alone was already deeply unsettling for information gathering. As long as Jester's senses could reach someone, very little would remain truly private. At the same time, Michael's mouth twitched faintly. Why does this make me feel like a gossiper? Jester's calm voice answered immediately. Because Master is listening to a private conversation. Michael was silent for a second. Then he admitted, fair enough. He let the silence sit briefly before asking the more important question. Will this affect them? Jester understood immediately. No, Master. As long as I do not interfere with their fate directly, they will not be affected in any way. They will not notice my observation, nor detect anything abnormal. Not at all. At my current stage, Jester answered. One would likely need to be at least a rank above me to sense my gaze with any reliability. If the target is ordinary, it becomes even harder. Their senses would be too dull to perceive something like this unless I made direct contact. This is based on what I absorbed from the old man's memories. I would only need to be cautious of those within that rank. That made Michael even more impressed. At the same time, the mention of interfering with fate brought something else to the surface of his mind. Jester's new skill, the fate-related one. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 929. Fate 2. Michael's gaze sharpened slightly. If you touch their fate now, will it affect them? Jester was silent for a second before replying. Based on the knowledge I currently possess, it should. Michael's expression changed slightly. Jester continued before he could misunderstand. It should affect them, but not necessarily in a harmful way. At least not if the interference is minor. My current understanding suggests that light contact with a thread causes only subtle adjustments. The danger increases only if the interference becomes forceful, repeated, or directed toward a major outcome. Michael thought for a moment. So it wasn't harmless. But it also wasn't automatically dangerous. That made sense. In the end, fate was still fate. Anything related to it couldn't be treated casually. Still, his curiosity was already fully awake. Then let's try it, Michael said. But if it turns bad, we stop immediately. I'm serious. We're not going to accidentally harm innocent people just because we're testing something. Jester accepted it without question. As Master wishes. The faint golden runes across Jester's body pulsed once. Below the building, the two Supers Association staff members continued speaking. In Jester's vision, which Michael could now see as clearly as if it were his own, something changed. Around the two men, several faint golden bubbles began to appear. They floated quietly around them, some close, some slightly farther away, each one shimmering with a vague instability that made them seem as though they might burst at any moment. Michael narrowed his eyes. What are those? Their fate, Jester replied calmly. That many? It depends, Jester said. If one were to count the totality of a person's fate across an entire lifetime, it would be beyond counting. The world is not fixed. It is unpredictable. Even the smallest change can give rise to new paths. These are only the immediate outcomes most strongly connected to their present state. Michael understood partially, and at the same time he didn't. Before he could say more, Jester had already reached toward one of the bubbles. The moment his will touched it, Michael's vision blurred. Then a scene appeared. The two men were still standing beneath the building, still talking. For a few seconds nothing changed. Then the building above them groaned. A fracture spread, and in the next moment the damaged structure gave way. Stone, steel, and broken concrete crashed downward. The two men didn't even have time to react before they were buried beneath it. They died. Michael's pupils shrank. The vision disappeared. What was that? One of their immediate fates, Jester answered at once. Then he turned to another bubble. Again a vision formed. This time there were differences. The man on the left shifted first. The other laughed a little more. Their words were not exactly the same. A bird flew overhead in this version. One of them looked up for half a second. Then the building still collapsed. Again they died. Jester moved to another. One of the men tried to leave earlier. The other stopped him to say one last thing. The timing shifted. Their positions shifted. The angle of the collapse changed slightly. But the result was the same. They died. Michael fell silent. Bubble after bubble revealed slight variations but ultimately the same end. By the seventh one, Michael had already understood enough. His expression changed slowly as the meaning settled in. So this was fate, not some poetic concept. These bubbles were possible outcomes already gathered around the present. And if nothing changed, those two men were going to die. Michael stared at the golden bubbles with a weight that had not been there before. I see. For the first time, fate became a little clearer in his mind. It wasn't a single fixed line. It was a cluster of likely paths born from the current state of things. His voice turned lower. So if no one interferes, this is what happens. Yes, Master. At least from the immediate futures currently gathered around them. Michael's eyes remained on the bubbles. Then his gaze shifted toward the damaged building above the two men. He disappeared from the living room and appeared in midair above the city. Below him, the building in question sat directly beneath his position. He was just about to move when Jester's voice stopped him. Master, wait. Michael's body paused mid-motion, his gaze still fixed on the building below. What? I would like to try something first. Michael frowned faintly. Under normal circumstances, he would not have entertained the idea. But at this distance with his current power, stopping the collapse at any moment was not difficult. Even if something went wrong, he could intervene before the two men died. So after a brief pause he said, Fine, but be quick. As Master wishes. Jester's voice remained calm. There are two ways to change fate. The first is direct. The second is indirect. The direct method is what Master intended to do. Appear physically, interfere with the material sequence of events, and force the outcome to change. Michael understood that immediately. And the indirect? Interfering with fate itself. The moment Jester said that, Michael's shared vision shifted again. Around the two men, the golden bubbles changed. More of them began to appear, but unlike before, these new ones were blank. They emerged rapidly one after another, surrounding the two men in far greater numbers than before. At first they contained nothing. Then scenes began flashing inside them. One bubble formed a scene, then vanished. Another emerged in its place. More appeared. More vanished. Some flickered violently. Some stayed a fraction longer before disappearing, as if rejected by something unseen. Michael watched in silence, feeling as though he were observing a system rapidly recalculating itself. Then gradually the number of bubbles began to shrink. 10, 7, 4, 2, and then only one remained. But unlike the others, this final bubble did not simply fade. It burst outward in a silent golden rupture. Michael was still processing what had caused the change when he noticed something different below. The two Supers Association staff members were still talking. Then one of them suddenly paused. "Why do I feel hungry all of a sudden?" The other blinked. "Now that you mention it, same." The first let out a tired breath. "Let's go back to the branch and grab something before I collapse for real." The second gave a weak laugh. Without delay, both of them stepped out from beneath the building. The damaged structure above them groaned. And in the next instant, the building collapsed exactly as it had in every other bubble Michael had seen. Stone, steel, and broken concrete crashed down violently. But this time, the two men were no longer beneath it. They stumbled back in shock, staring as dust and debris exploded across the street where they had been standing only moments before. One of them went pale. The other cursed loudly. Neither of them knew it. But this was the first time they had survived. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 930, Methods. For a brief second, Michael simply stared. The dust from the collapse was still spreading through the street below, rolling outward in slow gray waves that swallowed the base of the surrounding buildings. Chunks of broken stone and shattered concrete had scattered across the road in every direction. The two staff members were still frozen in shock. Neither spoke or moved immediately. Then one of them exhaled. "That was close," he finally said. The other man said nothing. He just kept staring. Michael watched from above. The city spread out beneath him in the pale gray light of early dawn, and felt something settle quietly in his chest. Michael's eyes narrowed slightly. "So this is fate." His voice was quiet. Then his gaze shifted to the flesh resting in his hand. "Jester." "Yes, master." "What's the cost?" Michael didn't hesitate to ask. There was no excitement in his tone now. Having seen the effect of Jester's law and skill, Michael did not believe for even a moment that something capable of interfering with fate itself came without a price. "It consumes vital essence," Jester answered. "But you're undead." Michael's gaze flickered faintly. "You have essence, yes, but it doesn't function like a living being's." Undead didn't rely on vitality in the same way. Their existence was sustained differently. Their essence was closer to a fixed core than a flowing resource. "So how does it consume yours?" Michael asked. "The heavens are fair, master. To touch their secrets or gain something from them, one must give something in return. Status does not matter. Whether one is living or dead, rich or poor, the requirement remains the same." Jester's tone remained unchanged. "Though I am undead, my essence is still being consumed. In any case, vital energy is recoverable if one ignores the slow speed of recovery." Michael clicked his tongue softly. "There are faster methods," Jester continued. Michael already had a guess. "Say it." "Consumption." Michael's expression darkened slightly. "Of others." "Yes, master. Absorbing the essence of other beings can accelerate recovery." Michael's grip on Jester tightened slightly. For a brief moment the air around him seemed to grow colder. "That includes humans?" "Yes." The answer came without emotion. "I see." There was no immediate response after that. "However," Jester added, "it is not limited to intelligent races." Michael's eyes shifted slightly. "Explain." "Monsters can also be used. The efficiency is lower, but they are viable." Michael's expression eased. He didn't bother asking about the exact rate. As long as enough resources were available, what was lost would be recovered. That was simply how things like this worked. His gaze shifted back to the city below. The two men were already leaving the area, still shaken but alive. Michael's lips curved faintly. He found himself wondering whether he could use a skill like that himself at some point. But something of this nature wouldn't be simple to grasp. Better to watch what Jester did with it over the coming days, build enough understanding through observation, and then try it himself when the time was right and Jester had enough experience to guide him through it. Of course, Michael could also use his law. It was just that for something as mysterious as this, he'd rather have relevant knowledge of how it worked than blindly push forward. It would be bad if he touched something he shouldn't have. The space around Michael distorted slightly. "Let's go back." He disappeared immediately. With Jester's evolution settled, Michael no longer lingered on the matter. It was time to move forward. Among his more than 2,000 undead, not a single one remained below rank 3. This had always been his pattern. Before every advancement, he had always possessed power beyond his current stage, and his undead would stand one step ahead of him, forming a foundation he could rely on. Even after breaking through himself, that advantage remained. But now, after entering rank 3, the road ahead was no longer as straightforward. Rank 4 was different. The gap wasn't just strength. It was a qualitative change. Even for Michael, the path forward had become complicated. But that didn't change what needed to be done. After returning home, Michael reappeared within the damaged coffin of the Forgotten. Before him, a figure lay motionless. The body remained intact, but it was hollow. Jester had devoured the consciousness completely. What remained was nothing more than a shell. A rank 4 shell. Michael stopped a few steps away, his gaze calm as he observed the body. This was one of the 2 rank 4 corpses he currently possessed. The demonic supernatural elder. The other was the Drake. Between the 2, his eyes settled on the old man first. "I'll start with you." There was no particular reason beyond the fact that the old man's size made the process look more manageable. After all, even for reviving an undead, the size was also something that mattered. It would be naive to think a rank 3 giant would cost the same as reviving a rank 3 butterfly. Though the old man was nothing more than a shell now, he was still technically alive. To turn him into an undead properly, Michael had to kill him first. For a brief moment Michael stood there in silence, staring at the motionless body with a faintly strange expression on his face. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't hesitation born from pity. It was just discomfort. The kind that came from doing something unpleasant even when it was clearly necessary. He likened it privately to killing a chicken before eating it. There was no real moral struggle in it, but that didn't make the process itself feel pleasant. Michael exhaled softly. The old man had tried to kill him. More than that, he had been part of the group that wanted to use Aunt Mia and Lily as leverage against him. Just thinking of that made whatever discomfort remained fade considerably. He decided to give the man a clean death. In his current state, the old man wouldn't feel anything regardless, but Michael had no particular fondness for the sight of blood. Michael raised his right hand slowly. Mana gathered at his fingertips, condensing into a thin, almost invisible point. Then his hand shot forward, fingers pushing into the old man's chest. He was met with resistance. Even in this state, the body of a rank 4 existence was far from fragile. Flesh, muscle, and bone had all been tempered to a level far beyond ordinary beings. Under normal circumstances, even a reinforced blade would struggle to penetrate it cleanly. But with no will behind the resistance, it was hollow. It gave way after sustained effort. Michael's fingers pierced through flesh and bone, sliding forward until they reached the heart. Warmth brushed against his skin. With a slight twist of his wrist, the condensed mana at his fingertips expanded inward, silently crushing what remained of the organ. The old man's body trembled faintly. What genuinely surprised Michael was that even with the heart destroyed, the man's life force clung on stubbornly, a testament to what rank 4 tempering truly meant. Michael exhaled faintly in quiet awe of those in the rank above him. Unfortunately for the old man, with his heart destroyed, death came regardless. The faint lingering trace of life vanished. Michael slowly withdrew his hand. A small opening remained in the chest. He glanced at it briefly, then looked away. With the old man now truly dead, the requirement for undead creation had been fulfilled. There were 2 methods to create an undead. The first was through the undead revival skill, a direct instinctive method granted by his class since the very beginning of his awakening. Simple and efficient in its own way. No preparation or materials required. Just a corpse and his will. Even if it failed, he could attempt it again, up to 3 times total. After the 3rd attempt, success or failure, the opportunity to convert that particular target would be lost permanently. But more importantly, success was not guaranteed. The stronger the target compared to Michael, the lower the chance, and each failure reduced it further. This was a rank 4 corpse. an existence beyond his current level. Even if the old man was nothing but a shell, the quality of the body itself had not changed, which meant relying on the skill alone made failure a very real possibility. Michael didn't like that. His thoughts shifted naturally to the second method, the ritual. Unlike the skill, this was not something freely granted. It required knowledge, preparation, and materials. But in exchange, it offered something far more stable, a significantly higher success rate across the same number of attempts. From the moment he gained access to the Academy's deeper resources, Michael had already acquired knowledge of the ritual. This concerned his foundation after all. And more importantly, he didn't lack the necessary materials either. Michael's lips curved faintly. There's no reason to gamble. This was not a situation where he needed to take risks. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 931, Ritual. There were two methods when it came to creating ritual formations. Ritual could mean many things, but the one Michael focused on was the formation method, more commonly known as magic circles. The first method relied on a concoction. This was created by combining various materials rich in a desired energy, things like monster parts, specific herbs, and other compatible components, then processing them together until the mixture could be applied directly as the medium for drawing the circle itself. Once drawn, the caster would invoke their mana into the completed formation to activate it. The grade of the resulting circle was not fixed. It rose and fell entirely with the quality of the materials used to produce the concoction. Better materials produced a higher grade formation, which meant greater stability throughout the process and a meaningfully better chance of success. The method was flexible by nature, since the range of usable components was broad enough that a resourceful practitioner could work with whatever was available rather than hunting for specific items. The formation mattered more than the mixture. It only needed to be rich in the desired element. The second method placed its emphasis on treasures rather than the concoction. The circle was still drawn, but the concoction used to create it could be deliberately kept simple and inexpensive, since it was not the primary driver of the ritual's power. The real weight of the process fell on dark-aligned treasures placed at the anchor points of the formation. Rather than relying on the concoction to generate the necessary elemental energy, the treasures served as attachable conduits, channeling relative energy steadily through the anchors and into the circle for as long as they remained in position. This produced a formation that was considerably more stable from the moment it activated and maintained that stability throughout the entire process. Using both methods together, a high-quality concoction applied across the circle lines and substantial treasures placed at the anchor points produced the most reliable outcome that ritual means could offer. Since Michael wanted to use a ritual formation created specifically to revive undead, all his resources needed to be rich in dark elemental energy. Unfortunately, between the two methods, Michael could only realistically use the first. He had a few treasures, but their elemental properties were scattered across different affinities and could not be repurposed for this. He was severely lacking in dark-aligned treasures. That left only the concoction method, which Michael happened to have materials for. His blood. After his first evolution to high human, Michael had become something beyond the ordinary. In the supernatural world, as one grew stronger, they tended to begin embodying the nature of their own power. Someone deeply aligned with life or nature energy would develop extraordinary regenerative traits, their blood and even their body fluids gradually becoming closer to elixirs. The stronger they were, the more pronounced those properties became. It was precisely this reason that the bodies of high-ranking supernaturals were always considered treasures in their own right. Every part of them carried the concentration of decades of cultivated power. Michael's evolution had made this more pronounced in his own case. Even when he was still a standard necromancer, his highest elemental affinity had been darkness. He could use other elements before and after his evolution, but darkness had always remained dominant. His transition to true human had granted him a divine body embryo, which continued that trend and deepened it further. But after his class transition from necromancer to death's heir, the connection became something closer to identity. The class forced him to use darkness as his primary element freely while suppressing all others in comparison, and combined with his divine body embryo growing stronger, Michael's current physique had become something that could genuinely be described as a physical representation of the dark element itself. His blood carried that same quality. For the concoction method, what better material was there than that? Michael called Lucky to his side. The wolf in its humanoid form responded as he stepped out. At Michael's silent instruction, Lucky let the wood aspect energy flow from his body. Thick roots pushed upward from the floor of the coffin space, twisting and curling around each other as they grew. Within moments, a wide bowl had formed, constructed from interlocked tree trunks dense enough to hold liquid without leaking, its interior smooth from the compression of the wood itself. Michael glanced at it briefly. It would do. He held his left wrist over the bowl and opened a small hole in the skin. There was no usage of tool, just precise internal pressure applied to a single point until the flesh parted cleanly. As one grew stronger, control over one's own body extended to things like this. It was the same principle that allowed Michael to wear earring-type equipment without needing to pierce himself in any permanent sense. He simply opened what was needed and closed it again, leaving no mark behind. Dark red blood welled up from the opening and began to flow down into the bowl. It was not the red of ordinary blood. It carried a deep golden undertone that shifted toward green depending on the angle, the two colors sitting beneath the dark red. The volume built steadily. When the bowl had filled to a level Michael was satisfied with, he closed the wound and flexed his wrist once. Just one more step now. The concoction on its own would produce a workable circle, but there was one more step that would raise the quality of what he was working with considerably. Michael decided to include his blood essence to the mix. Blood essence was not the same as ordinary blood. Ordinary blood carried the surface qualities of a person's cultivation. Blood essence carried the core of it. It was denser, more concentrated, and losing too much of it had consequences that took significant time and resources to recover from. Compared to the bowl of ordinary blood already collected, a single drop of blood essence would carry more concentrated dark elemental energy. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 932. One isn't enough. The current Michael could condense his blood essence into 10 large drops, and from each large drop he could produce 3 smaller ones. He contemplated for a moment and decided to start with 2 large drops. Michael extended one finger over the bowl. A dark red drop formed at the tip and he let it fall. The moment it touched the surface of the blood below, the entire mixture darkened. The gold-green undertones spread outward from the point of contact like ink dropped into still water, threading through the collected blood until the whole bowl had taken on the same quality. The air above it grew noticeably heavier. He let the second drop fall. The quality deepened further. Michael looked at it for a moment. That should be enough. He stepped back slightly, giving himself a full view of the space he had prepared. At the center lay the corpse of the rank for demonic supernatural. Michael began to move. He dipped his fingers into the darkened mixture within the wooden bowl. The moment his skin touched it, the blood responded faintly, rippling as though aware of him. Then he crouched and began drawing the magic circle for the undead revival ritual from memory. Each stroke was deliberate. The smell of blood spread faintly through the air, though it was not unpleasant. Lines extended outward from the corpse, weaving into each other in complex patterns. Some formed loops. Others branched into smaller nodes before reconnecting at entirely different angles. At certain points Michael paused briefly to deepen a line or reinforce a junction, ensuring the flow would not break when mana was introduced. Time passed quietly. By the time he finally stopped, the entire open space had been filled. The circle was relatively massive, reflecting that it was a high-tier formation. Size and scale alone did not guarantee a better grade, but they were still meaningful indicators. Michael straightened slowly. The bowl behind him was completely empty. Not a single drop remained. He glanced at the formation once more, a faint hint of satisfaction in his eyes. Good thing I started with you. His gaze shifted briefly toward the distance where the drake's enormous body lay. If he had chosen that first, the scale of the formation alone would have demanded considerably more blood. Even in death, the drake remained in its original form, not the humanoid state it had once taken. If it had reverted, the process would have been simpler. That thought passed quickly. His expression shifted slightly. I'm getting ahead of myself. He hadn't even succeeded with this one yet. Thinking about the next step before completing the current one served no purpose. Michael exhaled slowly and refocused entirely on the circle before him. He extended his hand toward the formation and infused his mana into it. The moment his mana entered the circle, the entire formation reacted. A low resonance spread outward, followed by a flash of light. A deep, eerie green glow surged through the lines of the circle, spreading instantly across the entire formation like living veins illuminating themselves all at once. At the same time, Michael felt the effect of his class take hold. Since the ritual counted as a dark art, its potency was boosted by 50%, raising it roughly half a grade beyond what the formation alone would have produced. The space around the circle dimmed slightly as the dark element within was drawn together and amplified. Creating an undead involved matters of the soul. Had he been using the undead revival skill, there would have been no concern since he was intimately familiar with that method. But this was his first ritual at this level, and even with the knowledge and prior experience he carried, he remained cautious and deliberate in every movement. A few minutes passed. At the center of the magic circle, the corpse trembled faintly. Just as Michael's mana was nearly fully drained, the body opened its eyes. They white with no iris. Empty. The moment they opened, Michael felt it. A clear and undeniable connection formed between him and the body before him, firm and immediate. At the same time, a familiar notification surfaced in his mind as one of his contract slots was filled. His lips curved slightly. Success. The word left his mouth quietly, but the satisfaction behind it was plain. He stood there for a moment, watching as the rank 4 body rose from the ground. Then he exhaled and stepped back before sitting on one of the raised roots Lucky had formed, and gave a simple command. Stand up. The undead obeyed instantly, rising without delay, stiffness, or resistance. Come here. Again it responded immediately, stepping forward without hesitation. There was no instability, no rejection, no backlash. Everything was clean. Michael observed closely. He had seen undead rise more than 2,000 times, so the act itself was nothing new. But there was a difference this time. Among all his undead, this was the first at this level. The first rank for existence under his control, and the only one for now. Leaning back slightly, he studied it and felt the difference without needing any skill to confirm it. The presence alone made it clear that this was not something a rank 3 undead could be compared to. Even at the peak of rank 3, a clear qualitative gap remained between the two. So this is it. Michael's eyes narrowed faintly as a subtle pressure radiated from the undead, not directed or intentional, simply existing as a natural consequence of what it was. That alone would be enough to make a normal rank 3 feel suppressed just from proximity. His lips curved in quiet satisfaction, not only because the ritual had succeeded, but because of what he now possessed. With this, I'm stepping into rank 4 territory. Not personally, but he now had a foothold, a foundation that allowed him to stand on more equal ground with the tier above him than he ever had before. His gaze flickered briefly toward where the drake lay, then returned to the old man. One isn't enough. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 933, 2 Undead. Michael lay on the ground, pale and exhausted. His skin, which had always been fair enough to draw comparisons to a maiden's complexion, now looked dried out and faintly sickly. As expected, he muttered. I needed more material. For the drake blood specifically, the scale of what was required had been in a different category entirely. 3 bowls, each 3 times the size of the one he had used for the rank 4 demonic supernatural. Michael had known going in that reviving something of that caliber would not be cheap. He had prepared himself mentally for the cost. And yet, Michael turned his head slightly and looked at the empty bowls beside him. As one grew stronger, many things stopped making conventional sense. He understood that, but watching his own blood flow like a continuous river without stopping, filling bowl after bowl, was a new experience even for him. There was something deeply strange about watching your body produce that volume without dying from it. What truly left him looking listless was the blood essence. Out of caution and a desire to give the ritual every advantage he could, Michael had gone all out. 5 large drops of blood essence added to the second mixture. Combined with the 2 he had already used previously, that brought the total to 7 large drops out of 10. With this level of consumption, it made sense that he felt this weak. Blood essence was not something the body shrugged off losing in that quantity. Natural recovery would take a significant amount of time. Michael exhaled slowly through his nose. Evolving my undead really is the easier path. He meant it sincerely. It was truly difficult for those without a cheat to lean on. If there was an orthodox and unorthodox way to gaining power, Michael's usual progress was undoubtedly the latter. Procedures like his recent blood consumption were considered orthodox instead, which was a bit ironic since the good path was the slow and complex one. After resting for a while, Michael reached out to his rank 3 healing worm. The creature was not particularly impressive to look at, especially after seeing Jester's new form, but what it lacked in appearance it made up for entirely in function. Michael held still as it worked, feeling the steady pull of its healing energy moving through him. When it finished, Michael sat up slowly and took stock of himself. 3 large drops of his blood essence had been restored in a single session. Michael exhaled quietly, genuinely relieved. Without the worm, sitting at 3 remaining out of 10 would have been a recovery process measured in weeks. Getting back to 6 changed the calculation considerably. But he could already feel the limit pressing against him. His body's response to the healing had a ceiling. If he pushed for another round, he would be pulling at his foundation instead. That was not a trade worth making for the sake of speed. The good news was that his mortal god physique was not ordinary. Even passive recovery at his current stage moved faster than it would have for most people at the same rank. Michael did a quiet calculation in his head. The academy had given him until next week before he was expected back. That was enough time to recover considerably, as long as he didn't do anything else that cost him more blood essence between now and then. Michael dismissed the worm and stretched his body slightly. Though the cost had been enormous, the benefit was not small either. Michael turned to look at the 2 figures standing before him. The rank 4 demonic supernatural and the Drakeblood, now settled into its humanoid form. His rank 4 undead. He studied them quietly for a moment. Compared to his other undead, who in their humanoid forms tended to mirror certain aspects of Michael's own appearance, these 2 were different. Their eyes were white, flat and pale, a characteristic look of flesh-type undead in their most direct form. Bluntly put, they carried the visual quality of what ordinary people would simply call zombies. Michael had never particularly cared about the appearance of his undead. What mattered was what they could do, and by that measure these 2 sat at the top of everything he currently had. The rank 4 demonic supernatural had been a significant opponent in life. Whatever it had been before death, its power had not diminished in any way that made it unimpressive now. If anything, death had stripped away everything except capability. And the Drakeblood, Michael's eyes lingered on it slightly longer. Among the 2 undead it was the strongest. Michael, who was now their master, could use detect on them whenever he liked. If they were alive, he wouldn't dare attempt this. The demonic supernatural was graded at level 85, equivalent to a peak early stage rank 4 superpower. If it had been 1 level higher and Michael wasn't its master, he wouldn't have even been able to see its level at all, thanks to the 20 level difference between them. The Drakeblood, on the other hand, was at level 90, which genuinely shocked Michael. This was only 10 levels away from level 100, and 1 level beyond that was the threshold of a demigod. Thinking about it now, Michael felt truly fortunate to have succeeded in reviving the Drakeblood, especially on his first attempt. It was all thanks to the many advantages that made him an anomaly. Compared to the rank 4 demonic supernatural, which looked as human as Michael save for its undead features, the Drakeblood was only humanoid in shape. In its humanoid form, it had dragon-like horns on its head with scales covering several parts of its body. Michael knew this was characteristic of the Drakeblood race. Based on the knowledge he had of them, the stronger the individual, the more purified their bloodline became, and the more dragon-like their appearance grew. The more dragon-like they appeared, the more perfect they were considered to be. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 934. Evolution? Thousands of years ago, a true dragon had descended upon a human variant world and indulged itself. The dragon slaughtered every adult male it encountered without exception and took every viable female for itself. Some of the offspring those females birthed survived, enduring the incompatible blood warring inside them from birth. The survival rate was not high. The process was not gentle. But those who made it through matured into something that was neither fully human nor anything close to dragon, occupying a space between the two that had never existed before. When they were old enough, they were able to reproduce among themselves. That was how the Drakeblood race was born. Their strength was undeniable. Each Drakeblood carried diluted dragon blood within them, granting terrifying physical capability, abnormal vitality, accelerated recovery, and resistances that made them difficult opponents at virtually every stage of growth. The closer their blood ran to the original, the more pronounced these traits became. Unfortunately, as generations passed and the bloodline spread further, that concentration naturally thinned. To preserve their power and purify it for later generations, the Drakeblood became one of the many races in the universe that practiced internal breeding between related bloodlines. Cousins, siblings in some cases. The goal was always the same: keep the dragon blood concentrated to keep the race strong. In the wider universe, this was not generally frowned upon. Dragons themselves were creatures that did not recognize bloodlines or kinship when it came to reproduction. That the race born from one would adopt similar practices struck most as fitting rather than troubling. However, all of this was far removed from Michael's current concerns. Whether it was a true dragon or not, the current Michael was not even qualified to meet the minor leaders of the Drakeblood race. And due to their violent tendencies, he could not allow the race to find out he had turned one of their kin into an undead, or they would hunt him down without hesitation. This was common among top races when it came to their kin. There was an unspoken rule that ran through the universe at every level. The treatment of one's people reflected directly on the strength and standing of the race itself. A weak race could do little when its members were mistreated, enslaved, or killed by outsiders. A strong race could do a great deal, and the stronger they were, the less they needed a formal reason to act. One could still bypass the worst consequences if the victim was an ordinary resident of their home realm with no particular standing. Someone no one would miss or rally behind. The calculus changed entirely the moment the person held any degree of importance within their race. And it changed catastrophically if someone bold enough or foolish enough decided to use a significant number of a top race's citizens for something that crossed the line. There was a record in the Academy Library significant enough to have been written down and preserved. It involved the elves. An entire realm had been wiped out. The reason was straightforward. A good number of elves had been hunted and traded around like commodities. Race trade itself was not rare in the universe. It existed, it had always existed, and many looked the other way as long as it remained quiet and the victims had no one powerful standing behind them. But the moment the elves found out what had been happening to their kin in that realm, the outcome had been total. There was no warning or negotiation. Complete erasure. The lesson was simple enough. If one was caught doing something like that and the victims happened to belong to a race with real power behind it, the trouble that followed would not end until one side was gone. This was precisely why Michael had decided months ago that even if he had an elven undead, he would exercise caution about bringing it out anywhere in the real world. The land of origin was a different matter. But in the open world, the risk was genuine. The same logic applied to the Drakeblood. However, in practical terms, the Drakeblood realm and Aurora were so distant from each other that the immediate danger was limited. The concern existed in principle. It was not something Michael needed to lose sleep over right now. Still, he noted it. Looking at his two undead, Michael felt a growing satisfaction settling in his chest. But it was exactly as people said. The moment someone had something, they found themselves wanting more. Michael had initially planned that after reviving these two, he would head to the land of origin immediately and focus on beginning in Lily. That had been the intent going in. Then he turned to look at the rank 4 demonic supernatural and noticed something. This person had been an ordinary human in life. Ordinary human. 2 words that carried an entirely different weight for Michael than they did for anyone else. And the reason for that came down to one thing. His talent. Infinite evolution did not treat all starting points equally. An ordinary human was not a ceiling. It was a foundation, and foundations could be built upon. In other words, despite how strong this undead already was, it could be stronger. Michael's eyes moved over the figure standing before him, white-eyed and still. Level 85. Peak early stage rank 4. And yet still an ordinary human underneath all of it. The thought that followed arrived quietly and then refused to leave. What would happen if Michael evolved it to high human? A rank 4 high human. The implications of that alone were enough to make his mind move in directions he hadn't planned for. A rank 4 undead with the baseline of an ordinary human evolved upward into something higher. The multiplier that came with high human applied to a foundation already operating at that level. The best part was the cost. 100 evolution points. That was all it would take. Michael looked at the demonic supernatural for a long moment. He had originally planned to leave immediately. He reconsidered that plan. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 935. Rank 4 High Human. High humans were many times stronger than ordinary humans. This was not a subtle difference or a matter of degree. It was a categorical gap, one that expressed itself across every relevant metric from physical capability to mana capacity to the ceiling of what they could ultimately achieve. This was precisely why in the wider universe one's race could determine one's standing as much as one's personal strength could. A person did not choose the body they were born into, but that body set the baseline for everything that came after. The Starborn were perhaps the clearest example of this principle taken to its extreme. A human variant race by classification, they were not an impressive sight on paper. Their bodies were physically weak even by the standards of other human variants, and their lifespans were short, again even in comparison to races that were themselves not particularly long-lived. By those 2 metrics alone, most would have dismissed them as unremarkable. And yet they had climbed to the status of a top race in the universe. What they lacked in body and longevity they compensated for through 2 things that could not easily be replicated. Minds of extraordinary quality, capable of processing and understanding at levels that left most other races behind, and a racial talent tied to rare energies that most races never even encountered, let alone learned to wield. The combination of those 2 advantages, applied consistently across generations, had allowed them to build themselves into arguably the most technologically advanced race in existence. The gap between ordinary humans and high humans followed the same logic, if on a smaller scale. An ordinary human could grow powerful. History had proven that repeatedly. But a high human began from a higher point. The same effort, the same talent, the same years of cultivation applied to a high human body produced a result that a regular human body simply could not match at its ceiling. It was only when one started cultivating laws that ordinary races could begin to bridge the gap created by racial differences. However, if it were that easy, the concept of a great race would not exist, and great civilizations would have taken its place instead. Michael had read somewhere in the Academy library that races like dragons and phoenixes were so strong that it normally required someone of a higher rank to defeat, surpass, or at worst match them. The saying that dragons and phoenixes had barely any equals was not wrong. Michael felt that he and his undead were not a bad example of this principle in practice. Though he did not know exactly how he compared to weaker rank 4 superpowers if they were to fight with their lives on the line, he found it hard to believe any rank 3 could force him into a desperate state, with the possible exception of facing a true dragon. In any case, this only proved that a stronger race equaled a stronger starting point. Though it would be a stretch to say a single evolution to high human would make the undead demonic supernatural overpowered, it would surely make him at least 50% stronger than he was now. And who knew, after further evolution he might even be able to match the undead Drakeblood in power. He also did not need to worry about the undead advancing to rank 5 through evolution. 100 points was far too little to accomplish that. And when it came to intelligent races, his talent only evolved their racial baseline while their rank remained the same. Michael theorized that this was because intelligent races with sufficient talent had no fixed limit if they pushed hard enough, while monsters did. Even those who cultivated laws and pushed themselves beyond their racial limits still had to find external ways to improve their race. Since his talent evolved races directly, it made sense that it would strengthen them while simultaneously raising their ceiling. Thinking this far, Michael knew his mind would not rest until he evolved the undead demonic supernatural, though in reality only a few seconds had passed. Soon a bright light flashed in the coffin space, accompanied by a large amount of surrounding mana being consumed. Time passed and Michael turned to look at the undead in front of him. For one thing, it had gained Michael's characteristic green eyes that his other undead usually developed after evolving or merging with his blood. The old man, though he still gave off a cold feeling that was simply the nature of what he was, looked noticeably more alive than before. That was perhaps an odd thing to say about an undead, but the difference was visible. Before the evolution he had carried the flat, slightly hollow quality common to flesh-type undead. Now that quality remained, but it sat beneath a surface that had been considerably refined. Long black hair fell cleanly around his face, dark and smooth in a way that suited the overall picture rather than clashing with it. His features were fine, carrying a mature and settled quality rather than anything youthful or soft. His skin was pale rather than the characteristic grayish tone of undead humans after revival. Michael looked at him for a moment. Not bad. Unfortunately, Michael could only tell through his senses that the demonic supernatural had grown stronger. The change was there, present and real, radiating outward in a way that his perception picked up clearly. But he did not dare test it personally. The honest truth was that to properly understand the ceiling of what his rank 4 undead could do, he needed a controlled environment with appropriate opposition. A monster nest with creatures of relative power would serve that purpose far better than anything he could arrange here. The Academy was the obvious answer. They had resources, connections, and access to locations that most people could not simply walk into on their own. A request for access to a high-level monster nest was not unreasonable, though he had a fairly clear picture of how that conversation would go. They would surely want to know where his confidence was coming from. Michael exhaled quietly through his nose. He would figure out how to frame that conversation when the time came. Of course, he could also have the 2 rank 4 undead go at each other, but the shockwave will probably kill anything else in the coffin space. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 936. Bright Future. Unfortunately, after the evolution Michael didn't have enough points remaining to do anything significant. The recent consumptions had hit his accumulation hard, and looking at what was left sitting in his reserves, the options were limited. Unless he went after the corpses still lying in the city from the recent chaos and devoured them for evolution points, he could only wait for his daily accumulation to refresh. But Michael couldn't help but feel a little greedy after the successful evolution of the undead demonic supernatural. He had just evolved the demonic supernatural to high human and already he was looking at the next step. True human. Thanks to the concealment technique Jester had given him, Michael felt a degree of boldness. Though he could not yet accurately gauge the ceiling of rank 4 power, one thing seemed reasonable to assume. A true human undead at rank 4 would not be ordinary. The gap between high human and true human was not trivial, and applied to something already operating at that level, the result would be something genuinely difficult to account for. Michael found himself thinking about his own case. He was a true human himself, and within his rank he was already something that didn't fit neatly into normal expectations. Perhaps a true human undead at rank 4 would carry a similar quality. Something almost invisible to others operating at the same rank. The expectation for the future was not small. Michael looked at his daily refresh timer and decided he should be patient. As for the Drakeblood undead, Michael had already given its situation some thought. Dragon blood ran through its veins, but that did not classify it as a monster. Then again, dragons themselves were not classified as monsters either. They occupied their own category entirely. Out of curiosity more than expectation, Michael checked whether he could apply an evolution to the Drakeblood with his current remaining points. He couldn't. Insufficient points, even with a few hundred evolution points remaining. But that was not what caught his attention. What caught his attention was the threshold itself. Since a few hundred points couldn't do anything, it likely meant the Drakeblood was not sitting at the same baseline as ordinary members of its race. Michael turned the implication over in his mind. If the demonic supernatural had been an ordinary human requiring 100 points to evolve to high human, and the Drakeblood's evolution cost was already beyond what he currently had, then the most reasonable explanation was that the Drakeblood was likely already what could be called a high Drakeblood, or whatever the equivalent classification was within its race. The terminology might differ, but the structure was probably the same. Ordinary, high, true, each step a meaningful leap above the last. Which meant its next step was probably true Drakeblood. The thought made Michael rub his palms together like a thief. A true Drakeblood at level 90. Michael did not have the numbers to calculate exactly what that would look like, but he had enough context to understand that it would not be something easily categorized alongside normal rank for power. The Drakeblood was already the strongest undead he had. Evolving it upward from its current position was not a minor upgrade. It was potentially something that crossed into a different tier entirely. Michael exhaled slowly, a faint smile forming without him fully intending it. For the first time since entering rank 3, he found himself genuinely entertaining a thought he had not allowed himself before. Perhaps he might actually reach the point where the power under his command spanned 2 full ranks above his own. The expectation for the future was not small at all. With nothing left to do in the coffin space, Michael knew it was time to leave for the land of origin. Either Beginning or Lily needed to advance in rank, and that process required his full attention and presence. He had delayed it long enough. It was time to move. Before leaving, though, he made sure to check on Jester. Jester had reinserted itself back into Michael's clone body. From the outside, the body looked exactly as it always had. Michael's face. Michael's build in a younger form. The same appearance that had been causing chaos on streaming platforms for months. But inside was a rank 3 mind operating behind that face. Michael looked at the clone for a moment. Feels like I'm making some kind of chimera. Whether he thought of his Genesis skill and the plans he had for it, Michael couldn't help but think this way. It was the same feeling that surfaced whenever he saw Jester inhabiting his body. The more he thought about it, the stranger it became. Does it feel any different? Jester's green eyes shifted toward him. No, Jester said. My original body is stronger now, but that does not affect my control over this one. If anything, I can do more with it than before. Michael looked at him. More how? The precision is better. The ceiling of what I can push through this body has risen. Jester paused briefly, as if running through something internally. My previous calculations also need to be revised. I had estimated a certain timeline for advancing this body to the next rank. At the current rate, I may only need a month. Michael stared at him for a moment. Try not to push past your limit. Act with caution. Jester's green eyes held his gaze with an expression that communicated absolutely nothing reassuring. Yes, Master. After returning Jester to Aurora, Michael placed his full attention on his other body in the land of origin. Michael actually didn't need to switch his focus anywhere since after his advancement to rank 2, he could simultaneously control both bodies. The only reason the other body was currently unable to do anything was because the damaged coffin of the Forgotten was being used by Michael's origin body, and though it was bound to his soul, only one body could use it at a time. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 937, Lily. Since Thorndale was at least 3 hours behind Aurora time, at least in the regions Michael frequented, it was still dark in the land of origin. There were still several hours before any hint of an approaching dawn. Michael's other body stood deep within the Everlong forest. He had left his territory earlier in preparation. Though he could not do anything due to the coffin being used by his other body, it did not mean this body had to remain idle. This should be good enough. What he planned to do in the land of origin required space. He also needed to distance himself from anything he did not wish to implicate, or have implicated, in the lightning tribulation of his undead. Though given how much commotion he had caused during his own lightning tribulation, Michael felt that unless he was willing to go deeper into the Everlong forest, distance alone wouldn't hide anything. However, the current Michael felt bolder than he had been a few days ago. After all, he now had rank 4 undead. Not just one but two. Even if something bad were to happen, Michael felt it wouldn't affect him much. This was what he loved about the land of origin compared to reality, where he was restricted on many levels. Here, though he was still restricted to a certain degree, his level of freedom was undoubtedly higher than in Aurora. At least the stronger you were in the land of origin, the more freedom you gained. In the real world, it didn't matter how strong you were. There was always someone stronger. Michael looked around at the trees surrounding him. The canopy above was thick enough that almost no light reached the ground. He felt a certain unfamiliar comfort in the darkness. Unfortunately, he had to cut the trees down to create a clearing. After all, a disaster was soon going to wash over this place, and he didn't want it to spread any further than necessary. The lightning that came down during a tribulation was not ordinary atmospheric discharge. It carried an elemental intensity that left lasting marks on the environment it touched, and fire was one of the more predictable consequences of that contact. Michael had already seen what his own tribulation had done to the terrain around it. The crater, the fused earth. Cutting down the trees was not something he particularly wanted to do, but the alternative was allowing a fire to chase its own path through the canopy after the tribulation ended, which would cause considerably more destruction than clearing a controlled radius now. It didn't matter that the flames couldn't hurt him, or that he could intervene and stop a spreading fire if he chose to. He simply did not want to destroy the forest any more than the situation required. Soon a clearing 2 kilometers across had been carved out of the everlong forest. The work had not taken long. At Michael's current level, uprooting trees was not meaningfully different from pulling weeds. As for the uprooted trees, he made sure to stack them in orderly arrangements scattered around the forest's edge, waiting to be used in the future according to his territorial plans. When everything was done, Michael stood at the center of the clearing and looked around at what he had made. Satisfied with his work, he summoned the damaged coffin of the Forgotten out of his soul space but did not immediately rush to release his undead. After taking a deep breath, he first released his rank 4 undead. Then, based on first come first served, Michael released Lily as well. The moment Lily appeared in the material world, a dreadful aura and a smell of death immediately enveloped the area. Michael instinctively teleported outside the range of the 2-kilometer clearing. Fortunately, he had ordered the rank 4 undead to depart the moment they appeared. It was only now that Michael clearly understood the Academy Director's reaction to not wanting anything to do with him during his tribulation. Though this was his first time witnessing it from the outside, Michael immediately understood that if he stayed close to Lily long enough to be recognized by the heavens, it wouldn't only be her receiving a lightning tribulation. As that thought flashed through his mind, Michael turned to focus on the phenomenon that had immediately appeared in the dark sky the moment Lily was summoned out of the coffin space. Stormy clouds filled the sky above the clearing almost immediately, spreading outward with a speed that had nothing gradual about it. Michael watched from his position well outside the 2-kilometer perimeter as the coverage continued to expand, pushing further and further beyond the immediate area in every direction. Michael noticed almost immediately that the phenomenon was significantly larger than what had accompanied his own tribulation. It made sense when he thought about it. His own lightning tribulation had arrived early, triggered by circumstances that had pushed the boundary ahead of its natural timing, and it had appeared when he was advancing from rank 2 to rank 3. Lily was preparing to advance to rank 4. The difference between those two thresholds was not something that could be expressed in the same terms. The clouds continued spreading as Michael watched, the pressure they carried already pressing down across a range that dwarfed anything he had experienced standing at the center of his own tribulation. Michael turned his gaze slowly across the horizon in every direction. There was no angle from which this could be described as subtle. The phenomenon was visible across a distance that would draw attention from every corner of the region. Anyone with even basic sensitivity to mana would feel it long before they saw it. This is going to be a long night. Just as Michael had suspected, the surrounding regions felt it. His territory, being the closest, felt it first. People stepped out into the night air and looked upward. The sky above had changed in a way that was difficult to articulate but impossible to ignore, and the instinct to look up at it was apparently universal. The ordinary folk among them reached the most immediate conclusion available to them. A storm was coming. A seemingly bad one. Worried voices passed between neighbors as eyes moved from the sky to the fields and back again. They wondered what destruction the storm might bring down on them. However, among those with a degree of power and sensitivity to mana, the reaction was different. More than a few felt a chill move through them. This was not a storm. They did not know what it was exactly, but it was not a storm. Strangely, through all of it, the master of the territory was nowhere to be found, which left a certain knight captain deep in thought. Compared to the thoughts her lightning tribulation caused in the surrounding regions, Lily, who stood at the center of it all, looked up at the lightning gathering above her with light in her eyes. She could tell immediately, almost instinctively, that this was something very important. The feeling lasted for a brief moment. Then hunger arrived and overrode everything else. This was not her first encounter with a tribulation. It was her master's tribulation she was remembering. She had been there in the midst of it, and more than that, she remembered what it had tasted like when she swallowed it. The sheer density of it. The way it had filled her in a manner that nothing else had quite replicated before. Well, maybe except for that garden belonging to those long-eared, thin, two-legged creatures that had healed her master. The memory surfaced with remarkable clarity as she looked up at the storm forming above her now. Whether what moved through her was excitement for the taste, or anticipation of what she would become once the lightning had passed, or some combination of both that she could not separate, Lily opened her mouth wide and let out a loud roar. Immediately the first strand of lightning descended rapidly. Michael watched from his position outside the clearing as the first strike descended. His eyelids twitched slightly. The first round of Lily's tribulation looked closer to his second than his first. The gap between a first strike and a second strike was not trivial. The fact that Lily's tribulation opened at that level said something clear about what the heavens considered appropriate for what she was. Michael exhaled slowly through his nose. At this level, though, he was not worried. He had survived to his 9th round thanks to Lily. If she could do that for him at the stage she had been in then, this opening round was not going to give her any difficulty at all. As if to confirm the thought, Lily met the descending lightning with her mouth wide open. Chapter 938. Final round. The lightning descended in a single column and went straight down her throat. Without any of the explosive scattering that had characterized Michael's own tribulation, where strikes had detonated against him and sent energy tearing outward across the field in every direction from him, tanking the lightning with his body, Lily simply swallowed it. The effect on the surrounding area was minimal to the point of being almost unremarkable. The ground beneath Lily's feet cracked slightly from the weight of what had passed through her, and a faint smell of ozone spread across the clearing. That was all. Michael's eyelids twitched. It seemed like the last time Lily devoured his lightning she had grown a bit stronger. He had cleared 2 kilometers of forest for this, and the first round had not even scorched the earth. Seemingly angered by the undead's audacity, the second round began to form above. However, whether it was the second round or the 5th, Lily handled all of it. Each strike descended with more intensity than the last, the tribulation pressing harder with each successive round. Lily swallowed every single one. What made it more remarkable was what was happening on the inside. Michael could feel it through their connection. The lightning she devoured was not simply being absorbed and neutralized. She was using it. Each round that passed through her was being broken down and fed back into her body. The raw elemental energy of a tribulation being converted into something that strengthened and repaired her simultaneously. By the 5th round, Michael could already feel that she was meaningfully stronger than she had been when she first appeared. The clearing around her remained largely intact. A few additional cracks in the ground. The faint, persistent smell of ozone. Nothing that could reasonably be called destruction. The 6th round changed that. What descended was not comparable to anything that had come before it. The columns of lightning were visibly thicker, the pressure carrying outward in a wave that Michael felt as a chill even from his position well beyond the clearing's edge. He thought briefly about how he would have fared against a 6th round before his advancement. Then he stopped himself. If the 5th round had left him nearly dead, the 6th would have simply finished the job. There was nothing to calculate there. What made him narrow his eyes now was the nature of the sixth strike itself. By that round the lightning had crossed just over the boundary of rank 3 and was touching rank 4. And it came in 6 columns. Lily caught all of them with her mouth as she had caught everything else. But this time her body shook with the impact and the surroundings were not spared. The 7th followed quickly, as if the tribulation had decided patience was no longer warranted. It struck before the energy of the 6th had fully settled inside her. To combat the raging energy tearing through her from within, Lily instinctively expanded, shifting into her Titan form. The ground beneath her feet collapsed inward under the weight of the transformation, a wide circular depression forming around her as she rose. 30 meters. 40. She stabilized somewhere above that and held. The 8th round followed. At this point, the clearing that had survived the first 5 rounds largely intact was no longer intact. The ground fractured in radiating lines. A section of the remaining earth near the center was simply gone, compressed into something that was neither soil nor stone. Lily's massive form bore visible injuries across her torso and arms, deep fractures in her outer layer where the lightning had torn through rather than been swallowed, gray and blackened tissue at the edges. The wounds showed faint signs of healing, but the pace was too slow to matter between rounds. Lily was still standing regardless. Michael watched from beyond the perimeter, his expression anxious but attentive. His heart ached at Lily's state, but he knew it couldn't be helped. If a lightning tribulation were easy, it would not be what it was, and it would not carry the weight of the heavens' acknowledgement. The difficulty was the point. The damage was the point. The fact that one survived it was what gave it meaning. Neither of them paid much attention to the ruined surroundings. The 9th round was already forming above. The final round. Michael's gaze moved upward to the storm still churning overhead, dense and dark and heavier than it had been at any point in the night. He exhaled slowly. This is it. I hope you survive, Lily. He meant it. Though his journey as a supernatural had been short by most measures, many of the undead who had carried him to where he now stood had been with him from the very beginning. Lily was among the first. Whether what he felt was attachment or reluctance to lose something he had invested so much in, or simply the desire to grow stronger alongside her rather than without her, Michael genuinely wanted her to pass this final round. The final round did not build the way the others had. There was no gradual gathering, no visible compression of clouds into a tighter formation. It simply arrived. A single column of lightning descended from the storm above with a flash that turned the entire clearing white for one complete moment. A light so total that it swallowed all distinction between ground and sky and forest and left nothing but itself. Michael instinctively moved back further. The pressure wave that preceded the actual strike reached him before the sound did, pushing against his body with enough force to make him shift his footing in midair. Even from the increased distance, he could feel the residual energy pressing against his skin. The lightning completely enveloped Lily. From his position he could see almost nothing of her within it. Michael stood there and waited, his attention fixed entirely on his connection with her. The seconds stretched. Then the column began to dim, contracting inward before fading away entirely. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 939. Ascension. At the center of the ruined clearing, where the 40-meter Titan had stood, Lily's small humanoid form knelt in a shallow pit of compressed earth. Her body was damaged, wounds visible across her frame. But she was alive. Michael exhaled a breath he had been holding without fully realizing it. You made it. Michael was about to fly over to Lily when a surge of energy filled him. He stopped mid-motion. He understood immediately what was happening. This was the feedback from his undead advancing in rank. Michael let himself settle into the experience. He didn't know whether it was because Lily was now a rank 4 undead, crossing a rank he himself had not yet reached, or whether it was something specific to her nature that made the quality of the feedback this dense. Lily was not ordinary. Just like his other main undead, thanks to his talent, her qualities were not easily categorized. Though she was a 3-star extraordinary creature, Michael felt she was probably half an epic grade with all the resources that had been poured into her over time. Whatever the reason, the feedback was rich. In quality and in quantity. Michael stayed still and let it move through him, feeling his strength adjust upward. When was the last time he had felt feedback this intense? Only when his undead were first entering ranks he hadn't yet reached had the feedback been substantial every time. But at some point the returns had begun to diminish, and then for many of his undead they had stopped producing meaningful feedback entirely. The reason was not complicated. It was two things working together. The first was that once he entered the same rank as an undead, the feedback from that undead advancing further within the rank became considerably less. There was less distance between them, less of a gap for the feedback to bridge. The second was his own stats. They had grown to a point where the numbers coming back through the feedback loop simply did not register as meaningfully against what he already had. What would have been a significant gain at an earlier stage became something closer to rounding. The two were connected. Higher rank meant closer proximity to his undead's level, which meant less gap, which meant less feedback. This was why the first 10 to 20 feedbacks from a new undead tended to give him the most substantial gains before the returns tapered, shifting toward accumulation from a large number of undead advancing later. Soon the surge finished and Michael turned to check his stats. Each of his attributes had increased by at least 100 points. Not a combined total across all four. Each one individually. Strength, agility, constitution, intelligence, all of them had climbed by 100 points or more from a single feedback event. Michael stared at the numbers in shock. After all, even leveling up to level 75 wouldn't produce that kind of growth without using his accumulated attribute points. He had known the feedback from a rank 4 undead would be significant. But seeing the actual numbers in the panel was a different experience from knowing something in the abstract. Unfortunately and expectedly, there were no new skills. Michael noticed that without particular surprise. He had grown accustomed to it. The stronger one grew, the less frequently skills appeared through natural stat increments, and the skills that did eventually appear were correspondingly stronger to compensate for the reduced frequency. Quantity in the early stages, quality in the later ones. He could live with that. He already had more skills than he could comfortably rotate through in a standard fight. Michael brought his excitement down slightly and descended toward the clearing. The lingering energy from the tribulation washed over him the moment he entered the perimeter, but he could handle it. This was just residual, not the actual lightning itself. Even so, the area around Lily's position would be inaccessible to most for a while. An ordinary person would not have made it 2 steps in before the residual charge tore through them. And it wasn't only ordinary people who would struggle. Weaker supernaturals would have difficulty enduring it as well. The moment Michael reached Lily's position, the first thing he wanted to do was check her condition. A lightning tribulation was the heaven's acknowledgement and came with its benefits, but it did not leave the one who survived it in a clean state. The lightning could cause lingering damage that sat beneath the surface. He was already considering whether to call out the healing worm when he noticed something. Not only were Lily's injuries healing on their own, her aura was growing. The first he could accept. That was not a new ability, but the latter left him briefly confused. It took a moment for Michael to understand what was actually happening. The elven treasures. Lily had, to put it plainly, eaten things that were not hers to eat. Stolen was the more accurate word. Michael had assumed those treasures were fully devoured. She had gone from the mid-levels of rank 3 to the peak almost immediately after waking him, which had led him to conclude the resources had been processed completely. Turned out that was not quite right. She had not finished digesting everything. Some portion of what she had taken in had remained stored inside her, sitting in a state of partial absorption, held there by whatever internal process Lily used to manage energy she hadn't fully processed yet. Now, after ascending, everything she had been holding back was being absorbed at once. Michael watched her aura continue to expand and said nothing for a moment. He wasn't sure whether he was more amused or impressed. Probably both. Michael, together with his other rank 4 undead standing at a distance, kept still to guard Lily as she digested the gains from her ascension. A few minutes passed. Then her aura settled, the growth tapering off into something stable and contained. Michael turned to check her progress. Undead Titan level 83. Chapter 940. Another undead. Though leveling up more than 7 times after ascending was unexpected, it was very welcomed nevertheless. The peak of rank 3 was level 75. One needed to be at level 76 at the very least to be considered a rank 4 supernatural. Thanks to Lily's previous accumulation, she was now at the very edge of advancing to the middle ranks of rank 4. Perhaps her current strength might even be able to match late-stage rank 4 superpowers. With Lily's successful advancement, Michael now had 3 rank 4 undead. Just a week ago he had been worrying about this, yet a few days later he was acquiring them consecutively. What made him even happier was that they were not weak either. The undead Drakeblood at level 90, thanks to its bloodline, should probably be stronger than most at the same level. Perhaps against other rank 4 beings at that level it would be relatively dominant. Then there was the rank 4 demonic supernatural. Michael had once been a high human himself, so he knew what that meant. This undead should also be relatively strong for its level. Together with Lily, Michael felt that as long as he did not cross paths with a demigod or some half-step demigod nonsense, and the numbers remained manageable, he now had the capability to stand against rank 4 superpowers. One should not think 3 was too few. There were many races in the universe that probably only had 3 at the peak of their entire realm. However, putting everything aside, Lily's advancement has proven to be far too expensive. It's hard to say if this is a gain or a loss compared to evolving her directly. Thanks to her actions back at the Elven realm, Michael was now in massive debt that even the Academy was unwilling to touch despite how highly they rated him. Thanks to the treasures Lily stole, not only did she advance to rank 4 in less than 3 months, she advanced further into the rank as well. However, this would probably have been the same case if he had evolved her directly. No, my thinking is a bit shallow. Though Lily's race did not change, thanks to those treasures she devoured, her foundation has only deepened further. Saying she's half-step epic grade is not an exaggeration. If I were to evolve her now, I fear she'd jump straight to the peak of rank 4, and if she were just a little stronger, advancing to rank 5 immediately would not be impossible. Also, at epic grade she would probably still be stronger than her peers. Short-term this doesn't look like a benefit, but long-term it's quite advantageous. There was also the matter of shortened cultivation time. The stronger one was, the harder it was to progress. Perhaps through normal cultivation Lily would have advanced to rank 4 in at least a decade, and another decade to reach her current level, but thanks to those treasures it was shortened to less than 3 months. Looking at it from this angle, it depended entirely on the thinker as to whether the debt had its pros or only cons. Though Michael had gone deep into the Everlong Forest, the scale of Lily's advancement could not be contained by distance alone. Many could not see the lightning itself, but depending on their proximity, the sound from the lightning strikes traveled far. Then there were the flashes. The final round especially had been visible as a distant brightening beyond the horizon, a pulse of white that lasted long enough to be unmistakable. Many had seen it, causing various emotions to well up. However, the majority were relieved when the oppressive weight that had been pressing down from the sky began to lift, the stormy clouds losing their density and starting to drift apart. One by one, the people watching let out breaths they had not fully realized they were holding. The storm, as most of them understood it, had passed. Michael did not know what was happening outside his immediate circle, but as the one closest to Lily who had felt the intensity firsthand, he knew this matter could not be concealed. Before, he might have been a little worried, but thanks to his rank 4 undead, he felt considerably bolder. In the end, what could anyone do to him? Times like this, when he had thoughts like this, Michael felt the land of origin was cultivating a tyrant out of his other identity. Amid everything, what Michael had not really expected was that Lily's tribulation had awakened certain figures deeper within the Everlong Forest, drawing their attention toward his location. After seeing the stormy clouds fade, whether man or monster, everyone in the surrounding regions reached the same conclusion. It was over. People went back inside. Monsters that had gone still and cautious during the disturbance began to settle down. Then the clouds returned. The coverage spread quickly across the sky, and within moments the oppressive weight that had just finished lifting was back, pressing down from above with a density that was, if anything, slightly more pronounced than what had come before. The reactions below were considerably less calm this time. Back at Michael's location, He and his 2 rank 4 undead had already moved back outside the clearing's perimeter. Lily had been placed back into the damaged coffin of the Forgotten to stabilize her advancement. The ruined ground at the center, fractured and compressed from Lily's tribulation, now held a different figure. It was Beginning. Beginning stood at the center of the clearing, massive even in a smaller state. Michael had made the decision to strike while the iron was hot. Beginning had been sitting at the edge of his own threshold as well, and there was no practical reason to delay when the conditions were already in place and the clearing had already been prepared. Michael's expression was composed, but his eyes were attentive. He felt Beginning's ascension was going to be different from Lily's. As expected, Beginning's ascension was indeed different from Lily's. The first strike made that clear immediately. What descended as an opening round looked closer to Lily's third. The ground beneath Beginning's feet cracked from the impact alone before the lightning had even fully landed. Beginning did not open his mouth like Lily to swallow it. He simply stood there and took it. By the second round, Michael had already noted the difference in approach. By the third, it was fully apparent. Beginning's method was not consumption or deflection or any form of avoidance. It was endurance, using the damage taken to fuel what came after. Each strike landed against him, tore through him and damaged him, but Beginning grew from the damage rather than despite it. His body absorbed the injuries the way soil absorbed rain, pulling the destruction inward and converting it into strength. The fourth round made Michael feel a chill run down his spine. He and his 2 rank 4 undead retreated further without hesitation. Michael watched from the new distance and thought about what he understood of Beginning. Among all his undead, Beginning was singular in one specific way. His constitution held more life force than even living creatures at comparable levels, which was deeply ironic for an undead creature. Michael linked this feature to Beginning's law of rebirth. Sometimes Michael felt less like he had a powerful undead and more like he had a powerful medicinal vessel of concentrated life force. If someone could devour Beginning, or even a meaningful portion of what he carried, the life force density alone would probably be enough to push past a cultivation bottleneck that had been sitting immovable for years, perhaps longer. As his mind wandered to distract himself from the anxiety building in his chest, most of his attention remained fixed on Beginning. As the rounds continued, Beginning grew. Not just in size, though that happened too, but in strength. Thanks to his law of rebirth, Beginning used the injuries sustained from each round to grow stronger for the next. The tribulation was, in the most direct sense, fueling the very thing it was trying to break. By the 5th round, Beginning was meaningfully stronger than he had been at the start of the tribulation. By the 7th, a change occurred. Beginning had taken the accumulated strength of everything the tribulation had given him and used it to forcefully push himself across the threshold. He crossed into rank 4 before the tribulation had finished with him, forcing the transition through sheer accumulated force rather than waiting for the natural completion of the process. The sky responded immediately. Whatever calculation the heavens used to determine the intensity of the remaining rounds, the answer it produced after Beginning's force crossing was different from what it had been producing before. The 8th round descended with a violence that made Michael's jaw tighten. The ground where Beginning stood did not just crack. A wide section of the already ruined clearing dropped several meters as the impact transferred downward through the earth. Beginning took it without moving from his position. The 9th round formed almost immediately after. Michael watched the sky above the clearing grow heavier and descend with a final strike, completely enveloping Beginning, who had forcefully pushed himself to level 85. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 941, Shoujo. Michael didn't know how long it took, but when the lightning stopped enveloping Beginning's massive figure, it faded away along with every sign of the tribulation. Beginning sank back into its smaller size and lay motionless at the center of the ruined clearing. After a brief hesitation, Michael appeared beside Beginning, and a moment later a smile emerged on his face. "I'm pretty lucky today, aren't I?" he couldn't help but say. Whether it was Jester's transformation or suddenly gaining 4 rank 4 undead in quick succession, each development was quite significant to the current Michael. Though there had been a few surprises along the way, it had ended well. "You leveled up as well? I wonder if it has something to do with devouring that rank 4 Amarazi elder." Thinking about it, Michael felt it was quite a coincidence that both of his titans had, one way or another, devoured something above their class to cheat their way up to rank 4, with side benefits following along in each case. However, if possible, Michael sincerely hoped a repeat of either method would not happen again. At their current stage, if Lily followed her previous path and ate someone's belongings without permission again to ascend to rank 5, Michael would rather fight to the death than carry a debt of that scale on his head. As for Beginning's method of devouring someone above his rank in an all-out life and death battle, if he had any choice in the matter, Michael really did not enjoy courting death. Whatever. At least it ended well. With the foundation provided from devouring that rank 4 Amarazi Elder, Beginning had been able to level up to level 80 immediately after ascending. Michael could tell this was just the surface benefit Beginning had gained from his previous actions, much like Lily, but he could only look deeper into it another time. The current location was not suitable. Just after Michael placed Beginning into the coffin space to stabilize his ascension, his eyes suddenly narrowed as he turned to look at the sky. At some point his 2 other rank 4 undead had appeared by his side. The 3 of them stood together and stared upward without speaking. 2 tribulations in succession had cleared the immediate area of everything that breathed. The usual ambient sounds of a deep forest at night were completely absent. The night sky above the ruined clearing was exceptionally clear as a result, unobstructed and dark, with nothing moving across it, except for the figure far above them staring down. Michael's eyes stayed narrowed as he tried his best not to lose composure. The aura coming from the figure was the first thing that registered. The feeling it produced was no less heavy than what radiated from either of the 2 undead standing beside him, which meant whoever was up there was at a level that put them firmly in the same category as his strongest. The second thing Michael registered was their appearance. They were completely naked. Not a single piece of clothing anywhere. A few seconds passed in silence. The figure spoke. "Could you stop staring at my privates?" The voice that came down from above was unhurried and carried no particular embarrassment behind it. "I do not particularly care about covering myself the way humans and certain other races do, but I still appreciate not being stared at down there." Michael's gaze snapped upward immediately. "Senior, I apologize. I couldn't help myself." A brief pause followed from above. "You couldn't help yourself?" The figure repeated back to him without inflection. Then, after a moment, "You couldn't help yourself from staring at a naked man?" Michael opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no response to that which would improve his situation in any meaningful way, so he chose silence as the most dignified available option and kept his eyes firmly fixed on the figure's face instead, or at least on the general region of the face, which at this distance and angle required some effort. The figure did not seem particularly bothered either way. Michael took the opportunity to observe more carefully, and a guess came to him immediately. Rank 4 superpowers were not common in the surrounding regions, and there was only one place something like this could appear from so quickly and in such a manner. "Senior, are you from the inner regions of the forest?" Michael inquired carefully. "Yes," the figure said without denying it. Though there was no hostile feeling coming from either side, Michael immediately felt a wave of worry settle over him. He had known the tribulation couldn't be hidden. What he had not quite anticipated was gaining the personal attention of a rank 4 entity from the deeper regions of the forest. This indirectly confirmed that the rumors about the everlong forest concealing something monstrous in its depths were true. But what concerned Michael more than the confirmation itself was what this attention meant for him going forward. His territory sat just outside the edge of the forest. That was not a meaningful distance for something operating at rank 4. Would he be able to sleep in peace from this point forward? Would he need to keep a rank 4 undead following him everywhere he went just to feel secure in his own territory? Michael exhaled slowly through his nose and kept his expression neutral. "Senior, is there anything I can help you with?" He kept his tone carefully neutral as he asked. The figure looked down at him. The silence stretched for several seconds. Then the figure spoke. "Would it be possible for you to allow me to devour you?" Michael's expression twisted immediately. The twisted expression lasted only a moment before a neutral expression settled over Michael's face. He didn't know why this particular entity had its attention fixed on him specifically, but Michael was not the same person he had been even a week ago. He had 4 rank 4 undead. 2 of them were standing beside him right now. If it were before this, the moment he heard something like that, he would have switched to wisdom state already and ran as fast as he could. Michael had no problem with running to live another day. Michael's eyes moved briefly to the 2 figures flanking him, then back up to the naked entity floating above. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Michael said eventually. "Okay," the figure said when both sides moved at the same time. Asterisk. The heavens were truly equal to everything and biased toward only a few chosen ones. Regardless of whether it was monsters or intelligent races, the heavens gave everyone a chance based on their own fortune and fate to challenge what it. The path might look different depending on what you were, but the opportunity existed for all things with sufficient that were willing to reach for it. Monsters received their advantages in the form of bloodline and longevity. A powerful bloodline meant a stronger starting point with capabilities that intelligent races would have to cultivate for decades to approximate. In time, monsters lived far longer than most intelligent races by default, which meant that even a creature of middling talent had centuries to accumulate strength that a shorter-lived being could only match through effort, talent, or opportunities. Intelligent races, by contrast, received something different. Most could not rely on bloodline as their bodies were not built with the same inherent advantages. What they had instead was wisdom. Shoujo was a beast, and though at rank 4 it had wisdom no less than some intelligent races, it was still a beast in the end. His path was different from theirs. 1,000 years ago, Shoujo had been nothing more than an ordinary deer. Not a remarkable one. Just a deer, existing in the way deer existed, until the day an opportunity descended on it that had no particular reason to have chosen it over anything else in the vicinity. That was the heaven's equality in its most honest form. It did not always choose the worthy. Sometimes it simply chose. The opportunity had granted Shoujo the ability to devour other creatures and convert what they carried into its own strength. The path that followed was not gentle. But the heavens had given it something precious, and it had used that something to the fullest extent available to it. More than 5 centuries ago, Shoujo had settled here and turned the everlong forest into a farm. It cultivated monsters within its borders, nurturing them with the patience that only something with its lifespan could sustain, and when they reached a level worth harvesting, it devoured them. The cycle had fed its growth for generations of creatures that never understood what the forest they lived in actually was. A while ago, when Lily's ascension had split the night sky open and sent its pressure rolling outward through the deep forest, it had woken Shoujo from a long period of stillness. He thought it was one of his crops ascending, but he did not rush to devour it. This was not unusual for him. Shoujo had learned centuries ago that patience produced better results than haste. A newly ascended creature still carried the turbulence of its breakthrough. It was better to wait, let things settle, allow the new rank to be absorbed properly. The flavor improved and the yield was higher. What it hadn't expected was that almost immediately, a second one of his crops ascended to rank 4 as well. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 942, Domain Clash. 2 in the same night. Shoujo was filled with suspicion. In 5 centuries of running this forest as his personal cultivation ground, a great many things had happened under his nose. For example, a group of mages experimenting with taboo magic had once set up in a corner of his territory, and he had eaten a few of them for entertainment before they got too far with whatever they were attempting. Strange occurrences were not new to him. But 2 of his crops ascending to his rank on the same night from the same location had never happened once in all that time. The probability alone felt wrong. And anything that felt wrong in his forest warranted investigation. This was how it found Michael. After devouring that opportunity many years ago, as Shoujo grew in power, it had gained something beyond simple strength. It gained the ability to sense fortune. Intelligent races seemed to call it bloodline or something similar, and the terminology varied depending on who was speaking, but Shoujo understood it in simpler terms. Certain creatures carried something special in their blood, a density of fate or fortune that set them apart from ordinary existence in ways that went beyond rank or level. When Shoujo encountered one of these individuals, it knew. The sensation was distinct and unmistakable, like the difference between ordinary food and something rare. Preferred devouring the special ones. The quality was simply better. The gains that followed were not comparable to what it received from consuming ordinary creatures, no matter how strong those ordinary creatures happened to be. At one point centuries ago, shoujo had attempted to cultivate its own supply. The logic had seemed sound at the time. If special bloodlines produced better results, then breeding them deliberately within his territory should have been more efficient than waiting and hoping. The process had been slower than farming ordinary monsters. The special quality in the bloodline did not accelerate under cultivation the way ordinary strength did. It developed at its own pace and could not be meaningfully rushed. In the end, impatience had won over strategy. Shoujo had devoured its undeveloped offspring and their mothers before the experiment could reach its intended conclusion. The breakthrough that followed had been significant, bittersweet, but significant nonetheless. It had not attempted the experiment again. The last time shoujo had encountered someone carrying that special quality had been less than a decade ago. That individual had carried themselves with the bearing of a dragon and seemed to have been of important status among humans given how they conducted themselves. They had been of similar strength. The fight had been dangerous and shoujo had won only narrowly and with injuries. However, risk and profit went hand in hand. The advancement that followed had been the most significant shoujo had experienced in a very long time. But the injuries and the recovery that followed were also what had pushed it toward the extended period of rest it had only recently emerged from. Since that battle, shoujo had not encountered another being carrying that quality. Until tonight. In its entire life, Michael was the most special being shoujo had ever encountered. That was not a small statement. Shoujo had lived for 1,000 years and had crossed paths with countless creatures. None of them had felt like this. Shoujo was not a creature that sought death. Seeing 2 rank 4 peers standing beside the human youth should have been enough to discourage it, but for some reason it did not feel like turning away. The pull of what it sensed in Michael's blood was stronger than the calculation. It made shoujo remember a long-forgotten feeling from when it had first received that opportunity. Felt exactly like this moment. This was fate. Yes, the heavens were blessing it again. Perhaps if shoujo had stilled itself properly and taken the time to examine its own behavior, it would have noticed that something was off. But shoujo did not stop to examine itself. It believed what it had always believed. Risks and profits went hand in hand. Every significant gain in its long life had come attached to genuine danger, and the greatest gains had come attached to the greatest dangers. If it devoured this human youth, everything would be worth it. Rank 4 supernaturals did not fight the way those below rank 3 fought. Below rank 3, combat was largely a matter of applying the forces of nature available, or pure or mixed bodily strength. Powerful in its own right, capable of devastating results when wielded with enough force, but ultimately grounded in direct application. One thing hitting another thing with varying degrees of sophistication in how that contact was arranged. Rank 3 represented a step beyond that. At that stage, the strongest attacks were law skills, abilities born from the cultivator's personal law seed. But rank 4 was different again. When rank 4 beings fought, the first priority was not attack or defense in the conventional sense. It was to gain home ground advantage. The ability to drag an opponent into one's own domain and hold them there was the defining advantage available at that stage, and the ones who understood how to establish and maintain that advantage were the ones who won fights more often than they lost. The law domain was what separated rank 4 from everything below it. Where a law seed existed internally, cultivated and refined within the soul that had partially merged with the physical body, a law domain was the external manifestation of that same law projected outward into the surrounding world. A rank 4 supernatural who activated their domain did not simply become stronger. They changed the rules of the space they occupied, bending the conditions of the fight toward themselves. When 2 rank 4 beings of similar strength activated their domains simultaneously, the competing influences tended to cancel each other out, producing a contested space where neither held a clean advantage and raw strength became the primary deciding factor again. This meant the one who established their domain first had the biggest advantage in most exchanges. Being inside someone else's domain was not simply disadvantageous. Getting out of a domain once inside it was possible, but it required exceptional strength capable of overpowering the influence directly. In most rank 4 battles, who moved first carried the greatest advantage. Which was why the first move in a serious rank 4 confrontation was rarely an attack. It was a domain clash. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 943, Gaining Advantage. The moment Shoujo showed intent to attack, Michael's 2 other rank 4 undead reacted. But they were a beat too slow. In the end, they were just 2 newly revived undead. However capable they were in terms of raw power, or however much of their original strength they had retained or gained through the resurrection process, they were still operating with the particular dullness that came with being freshly raised. The instincts were there, preserved in some form within the body and the remnants of what they had been, but the edges were not sharp yet. The rank 4 demonic supernatural was a particular case as well, as its consciousness had been devoured by Jester to extract information. One's true self was ultimately rooted in the soul rather than the mind, so there had been no catastrophic loss, but an empty skull was still an empty skull. A problem like this would have resolved itself naturally given time. It did not require focused training or special intervention. Even without deliberate effort, a new undead left to simply exist would gradually accumulate traces of a new identity, filling in the gaps that resurrection had left behind. Unfortunately, at the moment Michael 2 rank 4 undead were more like new AI tools. All 3 released their domains at the same time, though the 2 undead were a fraction slower. The sky changed immediately. Above them, centered on Shoujo, the sky reddened, spreading outward from Shoujo's position toward the ground where Michael and his undead stood. It wanted to envelop them. On Michael's left, the demonic supernatural released its domain. The ground in that direction changed first. A dark, empty world spread outward from where it stood, colorless and flat, with black water lying still across its surface. On Michael's right, the Drakeblood's domain opened. A fiery mountain range erupted into being, peaks appearing in an instant, their surfaces deep red and black with veins of molten rock running between them. Heat radiated outward immediately, pressing against the air. The 3 domains met at their midpoints, but instead of any dramatic explosion as Michael had expected, they canceled themselves out. Every phenomenon that had just appeared disappeared without a trace, as though the 3 worlds that had briefly existed had never manifested at all. Michael knew a bit about the methods of rank 4 supernaturals, but what he knew was at most the basics, leaving him largely clueless as he could only watch as his undead and Shoujo exchange a move. If Michael had been a bit more knowledgeable about rank 4 combat, he would have understood immediately why the domains had cancelled themselves out rather than any of the 3 producing any clear advantage. Every rank 4 domain was independent. Each one was a projection of its owner's law outward into the surrounding world. The strength of a domain was directly tied to the strength of the one behind it, which meant 2 domains of similar power pressing against each other would produce exactly what had happened here. A cancellation. The logic extended further than that, however, and this was where things became complicated in a way Michael has yet to realize. Shoujo had faced a 2-on-1 situation. 1 domain against 2. By any surface reading, that should have been an advantage for Michael's side. But that was not how domains worked. 2 domains released in the same space did not combine their strength. They remained independent of each other even when their owners were on the same side, each one occupying the contested area as a separate influence. The result was not doubled pressure against Shoujo. It was 3 separate domains all pressing against each other simultaneously, with the same cancellation logic applying across all 3 relationships at once. What should have been a coordinated advantage had instead produced a 3-way stalemate. If one of the 2 undead happened to be individually stronger than Shoujo in terms of domain strength, that undead might have been able to gain a genuine advantage in a direct 1-on-1 clash. But the moment the second undead released its domain alongside it, that potential advantage collapsed. Unless the gap in power between the parties was large enough that one domain could simply overpower everything else present, releasing multiple domains in the same space was counterproductive. Clueless, Michael watched from his position and thought his undead were doing reasonably well. However, the cancellation did not mean the exchange was over. Shoujo seemed to have expected his first move would fail, But what Michael and his group did not expect was for Shoujo to immediately release its domain a second time. The red sky returned and enveloped them. Michael saw a mass of red mist envelope him, but it was too late, and he plus his 2 undead entered Shoujo's domain. The world shifted. One moment Michael was standing on the fractured earth of the clearing beneath an open sky. The next, the scene in front of him changed. The ground beneath his feet was soft and yielding, muddy and wet. It was deep red in color, and one look sent a chill down Michael's spine. Not only was the ground red and wet with red liquid, but the sky above was also red. Perhaps it was more accurate to say the sky was a mass of liquid blood hovering in midair. Most importantly, everything smelled of iron. Michael looked around at the space they had been pulled into and felt the pressure pressing against him from every direction at once. At the same time, he felt his strength reduced, which he immediately linked to being inside Shoujo's domain. The current situation reminded him of Hell, where certain rules related to the alternate space suppressed many things. This was home ground advantage. Just as Michael noticed the reduction in his strength, a figure appeared above him and his undead under the blood sky. It was Shoujo, except this time it was not in its human form but in its true form. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 944. Michael levels up 1. The figure that descended through the blood sky was not the naked human form Michael had been speaking with moments ago. What appeared above them was a deer. It was massive. The scale of it only became clear as it descended further. The body alone stood at a height that made the surrounding hills look modest by comparison. His coat was red with unusual coloring. The antlers were the most striking part. They branched high and wide, and along their length they were threaded with what looked like dark veins, pulsing faintly like they were alive. It was eerie. This was Michael's first thought when he saw Shoujo's true form. The surroundings only made it worse. Against the red ground and the blood sky and the iron smell that saturated everything, Shoujo's form sent a chill through his bones. Yet at the same time Michael couldn't help but feel a little awe at its beauty. One's class could influence its owner in ways that were not always obvious from the outside. A fire mage who had spent years immersed in their element would often find fire to be the most beautiful and comforting thing in the world. A class centered on poison would eventually shift its owner's relationship with toxins entirely. The taste of things that would kill an ordinary person might become pleasant. Some poison practitioners developed a preference for it that extended beyond combat utility into something closer to appetite, and over time developed a discomfort with anything that lacked that quality. Class influence was subtle in the early stages and pronounced in the later ones, though this was not universally true for everyone. Michael was a necromancer, more accurately now Death's heir. He had only been in the profession for a matter of months, which was essentially nothing by the standard of people who spent decades or centuries on the same path. Though by reasonable measure the influence on him should have been minimal, it still existed. Trust was one of them. He found himself extending more natural trust toward the dead than toward the living. Beauty was another. One should not be deceived by the pleasing appearance his undead had developed after entering the great stage and gaining their human forms. Underneath it, many of them retained grotesque true forms. Michael had been around corpses and undead in various states almost every day for close to a year now. The threshold of what registered to him as strange had shifted considerably in that time. Things that would have unsettled him before simply did not produce the same reaction anymore. The unusual had become familiar. The 2 undead did not care what their master found beautiful or unsettling. They only registered that Shoujo was a threat to their master. Instinctively understanding they were at a disadvantage within the opponent's domain, both of them activated their own domains simultaneously. Compared to their previous actions, this was a reasonable method to cancel out a domain. Activating one's domain within an enemy domain was one of the crudest methods available for breaking out from the inside, but the effectiveness of that cancellation was considerably reduced when one party was already established within their own space. Breaking out from the inside required either raw power sufficient to overwhelm the established influence, or a sustained contest of competing domains that gradually eroded the home ground advantage from within, which was an exhausting approach. It was because of reasons like this that, as one grew in power, Battles were either extremely short or extremely long. After all, the more on grew in power, so did their method multiply. Unless the gap in strength was large enough to force an immediate resolution, a battle between equals at high strength would not end quick. Shoujo saw the two domains activate and made a strange sound from its mouth. Spears of blood formed in the air, dozens of them condensed from the liquid sky overhead, and descended. The undead drakeblood roared and flew upward to meet the attack. It shifted in the same moment, its humanoid form giving way as its true form emerged. The sky darkened below Michael as he watched the undead drakeblood launch itself upward to meet the descending spears directly. On the ground beside Michael, the undead demonic supernatural moved as well. Black water rose from nothing around it, pulling upward and spreading outward in a curved formation that positioned itself between itself and Michael's position. The water solidified as it shaped itself, forming a shield dense enough that the blood spears that curved toward them struck the surface and stopped, absorbed into the black water rather than penetrating through. All of it happened in the space of a moment. Michael's eyes widened with a flash of fear. He had been present from the very beginning, but his brain and senses had managed to follow it only partially, catching impressions and afterimages rather than the actual sequence of events. His mood turned grave. He thought about the legendary stage fights he had survived before this. Looking at what was happening above him right now and feeling the gap between what his senses could track and what was actually occurring, he understood with new clarity just how close to death he had been in each of those encounters. However, with danger present around him, Michael forced himself to calm down and brought his attention back to the present. Above him, the undead drakeblood and Shoujo were exchanging in the blood sky, impacts sending ripples through the liquid overhead in expanding rings. This domain was wide, and it was not an exaggeration to call it its own world. Michael was almost certain that if they fought close to him, the shockwaves alone would leave him at the gates of death. Michael watched with surprise as Shoujo matched the drakeblood. He could not tell which had the advantage, but this meant Shoujo's level was extremely high, most likely a late-stage legendary creature. On the other hand, the undead demonic supernatural held its position beside him, the black water shield absorbing the diverted attacks that curved away from the main exchange above. Michael's mind settled into a focused state as he quickly determined his next step. He had to cancel the domain. In the blood-soaked world, Shoujo's heart was not calm. It had initiated the exchange with confidence, and yet the undead drakeblood was matching it. Shoujo had not felt this in less than a decade. The last time it had faced something of this caliber had been that individual with the dragon bearing, the one whose blood had carried that special quality and whose strength had pushed Shoujo to a narrow and costly victory. That encounter had stood alone in Shoujo's recent memory as the one genuine test it had faced in years. Now here was another one. No, there were two. The one below was simply not fighting yet. Were beings of this strength simply becoming more common? Had the standards it had calibrated itself against over 1,000 years shifted during its extended rest? Shoujo had seen creatures reach its level across its long life. Most of them had been fortunate ascendants from its farm, but even those numbers were few. The bulk of its growth had come from devouring large numbers of great stage creatures. Great stage creatures were simply more available, easier to cultivate in large numbers, and far less dangerous to pursue. The yield per individual was lower, but the volume compensated. In any case, this all pointed to how limited the number of legendary stage beings truly was. Wait, if it was not mistaken, was the very reason it had come here not because of two creatures ascending to the legendary stage? The thought hit Shoujo like a physical impact. A cold and heavy regret moved through it as it broke off from the drakeblood and turned its attention downward toward Michael's position with sudden urgent focus. What it saw confirmed the worst of what it had just realized. Two more figures stood beside the human youth. 4 legendary stage creatures. The human youth had 4 legendary stage creatures. Fear moved through Shoujo in a way it had not felt in a very long time. It watched as all 3 undead below activated their domains simultaneously. The drakeblood above rejoined them, its own domain spreading outward to add a 4th competing influence to the space. 4 domains activated simultaneously inside the Crimson Burial Ground. It did not matter how strong Shoujo was. The Crimson Burial Ground trembled and then scattered. The blood sky broke apart. The red ground dissolved. The iron smell faded. The hills and the channels and the liquid overhead all came apart at once as the domain collapsed entirely. They all appeared outside again. The night sky of the everlong forest returned above them, clear and dark, and Shoujo stood in its true form in the open air. Chapter 945. Level Up 2. Shoujo was many things, but he was not stupid. Greedy, yes. Stupid, no. If he had truly been stupid, even with the opportunity granted to him 1,000 years ago, he would never have reached his current level. The moment the crimson burial ground scattered, Shoujo turned and fled with no hesitation. He did not count this as cowardice. A coward fled from fights that carried danger. Shoujo fled from fights that carried very unreasonable and unacceptable risk to its life, which was an entirely different calculation. There was no shame in the latter. Only the foolish, confused bravery with the willingness to die for no gain. In any case, retreating now was not the end of anything. The human youth was not going to suddenly disappear from the surface of the world. Could always try again later. However, this was exactly what Michael feared. In a direct confrontation where he had his undead present, a single legendary stage creature was not something he needed to lose sleep over. The numbers were on his side, and as long as he could deploy what he had, the equation was manageable. But a creature that might choose to stay in the shadows over direct confrontation was a different problem entirely. Michael was not his undead. He was only a great stage awakener. Against a creature he feared was very close to being a demigod. One punch from Shoujo would likely be enough to end his life. This was why even before the crimson burial ground had finished collapsing, Michael had already given the order for his undead to go all out. He had no choice. His territory sat at the forest's edge. He would never be fully at ease within it, knowing that something of Shoujo's caliber was likely eyeing him. Until this creature was dead, Michael could not rest with genuine peace of mind. A good enemy was a dead enemy. Michael was a devout believer of this. Just as Shoujo gathered itself to use its spatial prowess and put distance between itself and this situation, it felt the gaze of the drake blood lock onto it. A claw attack came immediately after. Shoujo could see the drake blood's fire elemental law threaded through it, the heat distorting the air around the extended claw as it crossed the distance. A fire-based law was not particularly surprising for anything related to dragon lineage. The blood of dragons ran hot, and the affinities that emerged from that lineage tended toward the destructive end of the elemental spectrum. What was more hateful was that this drake blood's physical strength was just as much of a threat as its law. Shoujo moved to avoid it and felt a spike of anger move through it at the same time. It had not even breathed the open air for 1/10 of a second before an attack came. Shoujo could immediately tell it was being given no room at all. The anger settled quickly into something colder. Though Shoujo felt a pang of regret over letting its greed cloud its judgment, and was paying for that now, it was not going to let these people gain an easy advantage over it. As for teleporting away, Shoujo was well aware that beings at the legendary stage were capable in spatial matters in ways that those at the great stage simply could not compete with. At the legendary stage, limiting an opponent's ability to teleport was a genuine and commonly employed capability. A careless teleport against the wrong opponent at this level, say against a true spatial master, could result in the attempt being intercepted and the one teleporting being brought back directly into the battle. Of course, opponents of that level were rare. Most times it would simply result in a failed teleportation attempt. Shoujo deflected the Drakeblood's claw attack with enough force to send a shockwave rippling outward through the surrounding trees, sending many of them flying. After successfully defending itself, Shoujo immediately turned to run when all of a sudden its vision changed. The surroundings were no longer the forest. Below was a world of black water. Above and around, there was nothing but gray darkness. One could still see, but only within a limited range. Shoujo immediately understood what had happened. It had fallen into another's domain. Knowing he could not follow the battle in real time, Michael had left several instructions for his undead. There were 3 steps to killing this opponent. Step 1 had been canceling the Crimson Burial Ground. That was done. Step 2 had been pressing the attack the moment they returned, giving Shoujo no breathing room. Step 3 was this: the trap itself. a domain where Michael would stop at nothing to kill this monster deer. "You dare try to actually kill me?" Shoujo roared in rage at the Drakeblood. Yet the waves that came from its scream did not target the drake, but headed in Michael's direction instead. Michael was still trying his best to follow the fight when a deep sense of dread enveloped him. But just before anything could land, a glass-like mirror appeared in front of him and defended against the attack. "Shameless!" Michael snapped, the word coming out before he could stop it. On Shoujo's end, the anger had not diminished. The two newly ascended undead had withdrawn back into the coffin space, but the other legendary stage undead from before remained, protecting the human youth. It was also the one who had trapped Shoujo in this domain. To get out of it, he needed to either overcome it from within with his own domain or kill the domain owner. Neither of those was a realistic possibility. The former was blocked because the undead Drakeblood gave him no time. The latter was also unlikely, not only because of the Drakeblood but because the legendary stage undead protecting the youth was not weak either and could be counted as an equal to the deer. Seeing that he had the upper hand, Michael knew killing the deer in a short period of time was not going to be straightforward. He needed to give his side another edge, but though he could rely on his two other legendary stage undead, he did not want to risk it. Lily, for example, did not seem like a good addition to this particular fight, and if she were to take a concentrated attack from the deer it would be a significant loss. Beginning, on the other hand, could put up a fight but needed to sustain several injuries first to get the necessary boost to become genuinely useful. This was something Beginning had communicated to him itself based on its brief observation of the deer. Lily's situation was Michael's own assessment. With the mindset that it was better to try than not, Michael activated a skill he had not used since gaining it from his ascension. Class skill: Death's Ground, Perfect Mastery. Description: the user designates an area as consecrated ground. The domain pulses with the authority of death itself, enforcing the user's will upon all that stands within it. Undead under the user's command are recognized as extensions of that authority. The domain persists as long as the user maintains focus or remains within range. Effect 1. All undead within the domain receive plus 35% durability, plus 25% regeneration, and plus 20% to all attributes. Effect 2. Fallen enemies within the domain have a chance to rise as undead under the user's temporary command. Effect 3. The domain passively suppresses the combat ability of living enemies within range by 10%. Stat buff: Strength plus 10%, Constitution plus 25%, Agility plus 10%, Intelligence plus 20%. Range: Scales with Intelligence. At Perfect Mastery, base range is significantly expanded. The moment Michael activated Death's Ground, a massive mana drain hit him immediately. The initial draw was enormous, followed by a terrifying consumption rate to keep the skill active. But the effect was immediate. A domain spread outward from Michael in the form of a ghostly green mist. The spread only stopped at 5,000 meters out, which was more than enough as Michael's two active undead were both well within range. The undead Drakeblood reacted massively to the change. It threw back its head and roared, the sound tearing through the gray darkness of the undead demonic supernatural's domain. Then it turned back toward Shoujo, and the aggression behind its next strike was visibly stronger than everything that had come before it. Shoujo felt the change immediately and its expression shifted, though not very visible in its deer form. Shoujo's antlers blazed with a deep crimson light and blood like liquid started to form around it in mid-air before shaping itself into spears, then following it were compressed spheres that detonated on contact. The Drakeblood did not dodge and met all of it head-on. It drove itself forward and took the spears across its scaled body, letting the detonating spheres burst against its hide as it pushed forward through the explosions. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 946. Level Up. 3. The exchange that followed was brutal. Michael watched from his position, tracking what he could. At this point he had activated his wisdom state, boosting his perception enough, making him fare better than before. He could see the advantage was on their side. But to his discomfort, the fight was not moving toward a conclusion at a speed that satisfied him. The undead Drakeblood's aggressive push, and the undead demonic supernatural's domain plus magical support continued pressing and suppressing Shoujo from every direction. The 10% combat suppression from Death's Ground was also contributing, but even with all of that combined, this was going to take a while. Michael's unease built steadily until he made another decision. He opened the coffin space and summoned Beginning. As long as you don't get swallowed or killed in one move. When it came to undead like Beginning, Spartan, and the others who had been with him from the early days, Michael did not like taking risks with their lives if he could help it. The undead titan emerged and entered the fight without ceremony. Shoujo registered the new arrival and immediately directed a concentrated strike at it. Beginning took it directly. As expected, within what could barely count as a first exchange, Beginning was injured. The damage was severe as Beginning took the full weight of a late-stage legendary creature attack without restraint. Under ordinary circumstances, it would have been catastrophic for even a fellow legendary stage creature of the same level. However, Beginning's law of rebirth made this situation uniquely suited to it. The injuries fed back into Beginning's strength, and Death's Ground's regeneration layered on top of that. Though it did not add the same excess buff to strength that the law provided, Beginning's damage healed at a rate that should not have been possible under normal circumstances. Beginning rose from each brutal exchange stronger than it had entered it. By the time Beginning had forcefully pushed itself to level 93 through the accumulated damage, the situation had shifted entirely. Shoujo was getting beaten from 3 directions simultaneously. The undead Drakeblood pressed from above. The undead demonic supernatural's domain suppressed its abilities while throwing occasional sneak attacks, and Beginning fought in close combat, trading injury for injury to see who gave out first. Shoujo had run out of angles and could only desperately fight for its life. Michael's heart only began to settle when he saw how badly the situation had turned for Shoujo. The deer that had trapped them in the Crimson Burial Ground and matched the Drakeblood blow for blow was now fighting desperately on 3 fronts with no clean exit available. It was the kind of shift that did not reverse easily. But even as relief arrived, so did alarm. At this point, Michael could tell Shoujo was considerably stronger than the undead Drakeblood at level 90. Many times stronger. At least Michael did not think that if the situation were reversed and it was the undead Drakeblood absorbing Shoujo's focused attacks, it would perform as well as Shoujo had. The Drakeblood's bloodline advantage compensated for part of the level gap, but the raw output Shoujo was generating while suppressed, surrounded, and beaten from 3 directions proved its strength. One should also not forget that none of Michael's undead were ordinary either. If they had been average creatures of their respective races, to achieve the current advantage, they would probably all need to be above level 90 at minimum. Michael genuinely wanted to know what level Shoujo was, as it would also say something about the current ceiling of his capabilities. Unfortunately, the gap between his own level and Shoujo's made his detect skill useless here. The highest level he could confirm on an opponent was level 85, and Shoujo was clearly above that ceiling. Michael found himself genuinely curious how close it was to level 100, the peak of rank 4. He supposed he would find out after killing it, something that seemed increasingly inevitable as the battle continued. Shoujo was a monster and not of an intelligent race like humans, which meant it would produce experience points upon death. Michael felt a pulse of excitement as he wondered how many levels his undead might gain from the kill, and then he suddenly paused. I'm currently at level 65. 10 more levels before I can attempt another rank advancement. Regardless of any advantage I have, progress at this stage will be slower than before. But what will happen if I take the last kill on this monster myself? Unlike some games where experience went only to whoever dealt the finishing blow, the Land of Origin functioned differently. Though a significant portion of the experience still went to whoever secured the kill, contributions from others involved in the battle were also recognized and distributed fairly. There was at least a 25-level difference between the deer and Michael. Even accounting for his outlier title, which suppressed the normal amount of experience he could receive, Michael did not believe the experience from a monster above level 90 with a multiplier of at least 25 times would fail to push him up at least a few levels. Reaching the peak of rank 3 in one go was probably a stretch, but several level up was not. This was considerably faster than grinding it out through law cultivation. The more Michael thought about it, the more his excitement built. He was also self-aware enough to recognize the situation for what it was. Having designs on a creature close to the demigod threshold while sitting at rank 3, not even at the peak of his own rank, was by any reasonable standard a little crazy. But the question was not whether it was crazy. The question was whether he could do it without dying in the process. Looking at the state of the fight above him, a window existed. Michael generally preferred the steady and safe path. But that did not mean he was indifferent to benefits. Perhaps he would not actively search for them, but he would not deny the ones that came to him. Michael deepened his resolve and passed an instruction through his connections to all 3 undead. Beat it until it was almost dead. Chapter 947. Level up. For, though the old deer continued to show its might, in the end it had to give way. Shoujo's heart was filled with hatred toward everything around it, with Beginning and Michael sitting at the extreme end of that hatred. The Titan's tolerance for damage was not something the deer had a frame of reference for. Though Beginning was the weakest of the 3, for some reason it had grown to be the most annoying. At some point in the battle, Beginning got hold of Shoujo's front legs and wrenched with full force, tearing them off as the deer screamed in pain. Shoujo's antlers came down immediately in response, a retaliatory strike that connected with Beginning's torso with enough force to send visible fractures spreading across the Titan's outer layer. Before the deer could recover, the undead drakeblood had circled around its massive body and closed its jaws around one of Shoujo's back legs. A thunderous scream echoed again as the undead drakeblood tore the leg free, leaving the creature with only one limb remaining. As if that were not enough, from the black water below the demonic supernatural acted. The surface broke upward in multiple points simultaneously, solid columns of compressed water rising in spikes that drove into Shoujo's body from beneath. One pierced its heart. Though at this stage of cultivation the heart was no longer a fatal weakness the way it once was, it was still a weakness nonetheless. Shoujo's screams only grew louder as it thrashed in midair. "I'm going to die." Shoujo's final thoughts were not peaceful. Regret filled its entire being as it thought back to everything that had led to this moment. The only conclusion it could arrive at was that it had been too greedy. It's too late now. Shoujo's consciousness started to blur when something registered in its senses. A figure was descending from above, but this time it was not the drakeblood the deer had grown familiar with. It was small, far smaller, and it had a spear in its hand. The human youth. Shoujo's fading focus snapped back with violence. The regret and resignation it had felt moments before burned away entirely, replaced by something considerably hotter. This child. This great stage human child who had stood safely behind his summons through the entirety of the fight, who had not thrown a single meaningful attack, was now descending with a spear as though he intended to finish it personally. "Who do you think you are?" Shoujo felt the insult of it down to whatever remained of its core. His body was ruined. 3 legs were gone and its life force would soon disappear entirely. The drakeblood, Beginning, and the demonic supernatural had done their work thoroughly. But Shoujo was still a legendary stage being. Whatever remained of it was still more than most things in this world could handle. "Since you seek death, let's go down together." Shoujo screamed the thought as it gathered everything it had left. A dying dragon was still a dragon. Michael had not descended with the assumption that a creature of this level was harmless. One moment of carelessness and he would die regardless of how thoroughly his undead had worked it over. Before making his move, Michael had gone all out in his own preparations. He had reinforced his physique with every suitable skill available to him, including his Necromancer class skill, Bone Armor. With the bonus from his class behind it, the skill was stronger than it had ever been. When he had first used the skill as a rank 1 Awakener, it had only produced crude bone plates to guard his weakest points. What covered him now was something else entirely. The bone had darkened to a deep gray-black, each plate dense enough that the surface seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The coverage was total, moving from his feet upward across his legs, torso, arms, and finally his head in interlocking sections that left no visible gaps between them. The edges were precise, each plate meeting the next with a seamless fit. At the joints, the design maintained full coverage without restricting movement. Along his forearms, the bone had thickened considerably beyond everywhere else, a deliberate reinforcement that turned them into something capable of being used offensively if needed. Michael descended through the gray darkness of the domain with his spear in hand. His law was active as well, with both the beginning state and ghost state running simultaneously. Together they granted him a strength and physical resilience that nothing at his level could match. Seeing the deer gathering itself below, Michael let out a roar and increased his descent speed. Shoujo released everything it had left into a single attack. Its remaining antler blazed, and a spear of compressed crimson blood launched upward with a boom that shook the domain around them. Michael did not stop. The moment the two forces met, it became a contest of pure strength. Michael's body took damage in several places as the blood spear tore through sections of his armor and reached the body beneath, pain registering clearly across his left side. He did not stop. With a roar, he continued pushing through, tearing apart the blood spear as he went, and descended like a spear himself, driving straight through Shoujo's massive head. The deer's eyes went still. After 1,000 years. 1,000 years of cultivation, and it is all gone. It is over. If only I had not targeted him. The domain dissolved around them as Shoujo's life force finally ran out entirely. Then the notifications arrived. You have slain a level 96 3-star extraordinary blood deer. You have slain a creature with a 31 level difference, earning a 31 times multiplier. Your title, Outlier, has taken effect. You have leveled up to level 66. You have leveled up to level 68. You have leveled up to level 69. You have leveled up to level 71. You have leveled up to level 73. You have leveled up to level 74. The notifications did not stop and continued for a while. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 948. Aftermath. Regardless of how many panels floated in his vision, Michael could not focus on them. A grunt of pain escaped him before he could stop it, and then another, each one coming out with varying loudness. Some distance away from where he lay on the ground was his spear, covered in fractures from tip to base. Layers of cracks ran across its entire length. At this point, it could barely be called a weapon. Michael's own body was not in a much better state. The bone armor had fractures of its own running across the sections that had taken direct contact with the blood spear, and beneath the armor the body it was protecting had not escaped clean. Michael could feel a deep burning sensation across his blood-soaked body. Such a sneaky monster. It was only after everything had settled that he realized the blood was corrosive as well. With a burst of mana, Michael blasted Shoujo's remnant blood from his body, and the burning sensation reduced. Unfortunately, the damage was no longer external and had already entered his flesh. What kept the situation from being considerably worse was his physique. His divine body had advanced alongside his recent rank progression, making his recovery factor comparable to a genuine rank 4 supernatural. The internal damage from Shoujo's blood corrosion slowed to a halt. Unfortunately, recovery did not mean the process was painless. Without hesitation, Michael shifted Beginning's active trait away from the injury conversion that fed strength and redirected it toward the healing function instead, deliberately forsaking the benefit of growing stronger from his wounds in exchange for recovery speed. There was nothing left to fight tonight, and walking around with corrosive damage eating through his flesh while waiting for passive regeneration was not a patience he was willing to test. He also switched his other open slot to the Undead Healing Worm, stacking its effect on top of Beginning's redirected trait. 3 sources working simultaneously was better than one, and before long Michael was largely restored, even if his tattered appearance told a different story. Michael exhaled slowly in relief and sat up, observing his surroundings. They were no longer inside any domain. They were back in the original world. Michael looked upward at the sky. It was still dark. I wonder how long until dawn. Putting aside everything before Shoujo's appearance, the fight itself had taken hours even with 3 of his undead coordinating against one opponent. Part of that was because his undead were under instructions to preserve themselves rather than fight to the death the way Shoujo had, with nothing left to lose. Michael had given those preservation instructions deliberately. The current him would not be particularly affected by losing a rank 3 undead as long as the numbers were not outrageous. But losing a rank 4 undead was a different matter entirely. If he had lost the Drake blood, beginning, or the demonic supernatural tonight, it was hard to say it would have crippled him, but he would not have come out unscratched. Michael was glad it had not come to that. Just the thought of a loss like that turned his stomach, so he stopped thinking about it and turned his focus to the dead body nearby. The corpse still radiated a terrifying aura. In death, without Shoujo's conscious control to regulate it, the power it had spent 1,000 years accumulating leaked outward unrestrained. Level 96, Michael muttered. He had known Shoujo was strong, but the confirmed number left a lingering chill in him. Level 96 meant 4 levels from becoming a demigod. Calling what he had just fought a creature close to that threshold was not an exaggeration. At most, Shoujo had been lacking only the final step or perhaps 2. Ironically, though I'm in one piece compared to my previous experiences, this is probably the closest I've been to death. Compared to his first encounter with Jester or the heavy losses he had sustained in Hell, though he had not ended up in some near-crippled state or triggered a system warning notification, this experience had been no less genuinely dangerous than those had been. Perhaps the only reason he had fared better was because he was considerably stronger now. Fortunately, no cliché plot twist of a sudden breakthrough in the heat of battle had occurred. If something like that had actually happened, requiring him to be in real mortal danger rather than managed danger, he would have died. If he had 9 lives, he would have spent all 9 of them tonight. Michael looked at Shoujo's massive body and shook his head slowly. Such strong vitality, he muttered, not without admiration. Despite everything, the corpse was holding itself together. The massive frame had not collapsed or begun the visible deterioration that normally followed the loss of life force. Only a small amount of blood had actually reached the ground. The rest of the body had gone into a kind of passive preservation, the accumulated vitality of a millennium of cultivation still present in the flesh and refusing to simply drain away. Michael understood it would not last forever. But given what Shoujo had been before death, this state would probably hold for years before meaningful deterioration set in. No wonder it was said that strong creatures were treasures, living or dead. For Michael, the greater treasure Shoujo could offer was its corpse. Unfortunately, I don't even dare to revive it anytime soon. After spending my previous blood essence, I still need to recover. Also, for a monster of this level, my blood alone won't be enough. Still, he was satisfied. This was a ready-made rank 4 undead after all. When he eventually revived it, he would be able to walk sideways not only in the land of origin but in his original world as well. After recovering a bit more, coordinating briefly between both of his bodies, Michael brought his storage ring to the land of origin and placed Shoujo's body inside it. Compared to the space in his coffin, his storage ring was more than sufficient to hold the body of a dead rank 4 monster. When I have time, I should transport a few of my undead to my storage ring as well. Though he said it aloud, his gaze lingered on his 2 3-star epic grade storage treasures with a thoughtful expression. After storing Shoujo's body, Michael recalled his remaining undead back into the coffin space, taking a brief moment to assess their conditions through the connection. Aside from the demonic supernatural, the other 2 undead had not escaped unscratched, but the injuries were manageable. After a few days of rest, they would be as good as new, so Michael did not consider their state a serious concern. He sent all 3 of them to rest, though undead did not really need rest in the conventional sense. As expected, the moment all 3 returned to the coffin space, they stared around briefly in a daze before going motionless. After that, Michael turned his full attention to the panels that had been waiting since Shoujo's death. He pulled them into full view and made a quiet effort to keep his excitement from getting ahead of him. Calm down. Michael stared at the notifications, his breathing slowly evening out. Killing a monster of that level, even with the reduced experience from his outlier title suppression, had still granted him several level-ups. That part was within reason. What he had not expected was the final result. Level 74. Michael let out a quiet breath, the corners of his lips lifting slightly. That's higher than I thought. There was a clear note of satisfaction in his voice. He had only just advanced 4 days ago, and yet here he was, already standing one level away from triggering another rank advancement quest. Even Michael had to admit this pace was absurd. Across the entire universe there might be those with monstrous talent, overwhelming resources, or rare inheritances, but this kind of progression rate should not have been common by any standard. And yet here he was. His gaze lingered on the number. Level 74. Just one more level. Reaching the peak of rank 3 no longer felt distant. Felt close enough to touch. If I find another one. His thoughts sharpened. It did not need to be something on Shoujo's level. That was excessive and frankly unnecessary. What he needed now was something more manageable, something where a 10-level difference would be sufficient for the multiplier to do its work. With his current state, that requirement was not difficult to imagine fulfilling. Unfortunately, rank 4 monsters were not something that appeared casually, especially not in this region of the land of origin. Creatures like Shoujo existed, but they were rare and almost certainly territorial. Given that no other rank 4 monster had come to investigate or assist during the fight, Michael suspected Shoujo had been the only one in the immediate area. Michael exhaled slowly. The land of origin had its limitations, particularly in the region he currently occupied. But Aurora did not. Though he was more restricted there in terms of freedom, it offered more options. What he needed was time. With enough of it, reaching level 75 was not a question of whether it would happen, but when. Michael's lips curved faintly. I won't be stuck at rank 3 for long. That much he was certain of. Chapter 949. Suspicions. Michael's expression settled quickly. There was no longer any reason for him to remain in this place. More importantly, he could sense multiple presences approaching. They were still some distance away, and from the way they moved, they seemed hesitant. That was not surprising. Any creature or supernatural being with decent senses would be cautious after what had occurred here, whether they had felt the tribulations or the battle that followed. But hesitation did not mean they would not come. Sooner or later, curiosity or greed would push them forward. Michael glanced once more at his surroundings and shook his head. I should leave. His body blurred. Space folded around him and Michael vanished. A few minutes later, four presences arrived at the edge of the clearing Michael had carved out for his undead advancements. They appeared one after another, and for a while none of them spoke. The land before them was broken beyond any simple explanation. If Michael had been present, he would have recognized two of the figures immediately. One was Princess Priscilla, whose presence seemed to materialize wherever trouble gathered. The other was the rank 3 leader of the Shadow Guard Michael had met at the royal banquet. From the identities of those two, the remaining figures were almost certainly also from the Lionheart Kingdom. Princess Priscilla stood slightly ahead of the others, her posture straight and her gaze calm, but her expression carried a quiet heaviness that did not go unnoticed. No one could quite tell what she was thinking. Her thoughts, however, were anything but calm. The current state of the kingdom was already tense enough without this. The disappearance of the Empire's prince had thrown every neighboring power into unrest. What made it worse was how the Empire had reacted. Rather than handling the matter quietly, they had begun stretching their influence outward, using the prince's disappearance as justification to probe, pressure, and investigate every faction that had entered the ruins he never returned from. Whether that reaction came from genuine anger or calculated intent, no one could say for certain. Perhaps they were truly enraged, or perhaps they had simply been waiting for an excuse. Or worse, it was both. The former could be understood. The latter was dangerous. No one wanted to be the first to oppose them openly either, as doing so would only draw suspicion and give the Empire more reason to act. In a situation like this, even silence was a form of defense. And now there was another incident here in the Everlong Forest. Priscilla's gaze swept slowly across the ruined field below her. For months now, strange occurrences had been reported within this forest, and this was simply the latest addition to a growing list. Her expression darkened slightly. The timing could not have been worse. With everything happening across the kingdoms, she had hoped at the very least that internal matters would remain stable. But the Everlong Forest seemed determined to prove otherwise. None of her thoughts showed on her face. Priscilla said nothing and instead listened as her subjects assessed the scene. Seeing that she and the Shadow Guard leader had no intention of speaking first, the other two eventually broke under the silence. One of them finally spoke, his gaze sweeping across the destruction below. From the traces left behind, it looks like someone advanced here. No one responded immediately, not because they disagreed, but because this was not a simple breakthrough. The question was not whether someone had advanced. The question was what kind of advancement could leave behind something like this. All of them already knew the answer. They simply did not like saying it. Only a legendary stage existence could leave behind a scene of this nature. Even if none of them had personally witnessed such a thing before, the records within the kingdom were clear enough. The Lionheart Kingdom might not currently possess a legendary stage being, but it was not ignorant of what that level represented, which was exactly why none of them felt comfortable saying it out loud. The air grew heavier. For a moment, even breathing felt slightly restrained. Then the Shadow Guard leader spoke, his tone low as his eyes shifted toward a particular section of the ruined surroundings. There are also signs of a fight. He pointed downward. Several faint blood patches stained the broken ground. In truth, the blood had already been noticed by all of them. It was only now that someone addressed it. One of the other men frowned slightly before replying. It could also be from the advancing individual. His tone was careful, almost deliberate. Not dismissive, just cautious. Because if it was not from the tribulation, then it meant a legendary stage existence had fought here, and possibly more than one. That was something none of them wanted to be involved with. Silence fell again. Priscilla's gaze remained fixed on the ruins below. Her expression did not change, but inwardly her thoughts had already reached a conclusion. She was leaning toward this being an advancement rather than a fight. Though the Lionheart Kingdom lacked a legendary stage being of its own, she understood enough about them to know they all went through a heavenly tribulation. The blood could simply be injuries sustained from that process. Let's leave. Her voice was calm but carried unquestionable authority. The others immediately straightened. No one objected. Without another word, the four figures turned and vanished from the ruined sky, leaving behind only the silent broken land. Before leaving, though, Priscilla could not help but cast one last look in a particular direction. A nagging feeling settled over her thoughts and refused to leave cleanly. Why was it that since this youth had come close to the everlong forest, it had never known rest? Was he the cause? Before giving the order to leave, Priscilla had briefly considered paying the youth a visit. The thought lasted only a moment before she set it aside. Their last meeting at the royal banquet had made it clear that Mike Knorr was not someone she could touch easily anymore. The more he grew, the more mysterious he became. She had long since stopped trying to determine his real identity. That particular curiosity had faded not because she had found her answers, but because she had realized that finding them might invite something far worse than not knowing. She could only hope his presence was a blessing to her kingdom. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much. Chapter 950, Future Concerns. Michael returned quietly to his manor in Thornvale. Though his own territory was still very much alive deep in the darkness thanks to his undead advancements, no one noticed their missing lord had returned. It was not surprising. Unlike when he had not yet grasped spatial powers and needed to sneak out and avoid detection, the current Michael could move however he wished without anyone knowing. That extended to many at the same rank as well. The first thing Michael did after returning was bathe. He could have cleaned himself instantly with magic, but that felt boring. He also wanted to use the bath to clear his head. Since he had no intention of sending a prompt message to the maids at this hour, Michael simply wielded his mana to fill the bathtub with water and heated it with magic. Though Death's air had made his affinity with darkness almost dominant, suppressing his other elemental affinities in the process, it had not stripped him of them entirely. Using them now compared to before felt slow and dull, like switching from a luxury vehicle to something 5 generations old and passed down through repeatedly from father to son. His class choice was not without consequences. However, Michael could bypass this limitation through his law. All he needed was to copy the traits of any of his more than 2,000 undead and inherit their elemental affinity. What Michael was unaware of was that though his affinity with other elements had been brought down, it was still many times higher than that of ordinary people. Perhaps he could not compare with rare monstrous geniuses in other elements without using his law, but the ordinary genius was far from his level. Taking a bath did not require many complications. After some time, Michael exhaled slowly and rose from the bath once the water had gone cold. He dried himself with manna before reaching for a fresh set of clothes. Soon a new set of nightwear settled cleanly over his body and Michael sighed in comfort. Once done, he stepped toward the mirror. For a moment he simply stood there. The figure in the mirror was striking. His skin was pale, but not in a sickly way. It looked healthy and well-maintained, like polished jade under soft light, without a single blemish. His eyes were a neon green that seemed to draw the soul of anyone who dared to stare too long. His hair fell freely over his shoulders, long and dark, reaching his waist, framing his face in a way that only emphasized his features further. Even Aunt Mia, who felt men should not keep long hair past a certain limit, could not bring herself to persuade him to cut it. There was no denying it. Michael was ridiculously handsome. Michael, however, did not see it that way. He just felt he did not look bad. But every time he looked at himself, he could not help but sigh. Why do I look like this? It was not that anything was wrong. It was just that he leaned a bit more toward the beautiful side than the handsome. His fingers were long and slender, almost delicate in proportion. His eyelashes were slightly longer than what most would associate with a man, framing his eyes in a way that softened his gaze. His hair, while unstyled, naturally fell in a smooth, flowing manner that leaned more toward elegance than roughness. His build was lean and muscular but not imposing. Not the kind that screamed strength at a glance. He did not look weak, but he did not look like the peak of masculinity either. It's a bit too much. Calling it feminine was a stretch. But it leaned in that direction. Even Rin, who had a slender physique as well, had more apparent muscle, which Michael linked to her armorer class. And she was far from the only woman at the academy who looked like she could protect him rather than the opposite. I wonder what Lily sees in this look. Whatever. We'll see how she turns out after becoming a high human anyway. If it's too troublesome, I'll just merge my blood essence with Aunt Mia rather than evolve her. Though the effect will be less, it would still fulfill my requirements. Michael pushed those thoughts aside. Appearance was the least of his concerns right now. He turned away from the mirror and walked to the chair by the window before sitting down slowly. Let's see. With a thought, he called up his panel. The familiar interface unfolded before him, lines of information stacking neatly in his vision. His gaze lingered briefly on his level before moving downward. Leveling up had never been just about the number. This time was no different. Putting aside the minor increases to his base attributes, which at this stage were almost negligible, what brought a smile to his face was his attribute points. 517. The number had jumped from 400. Even at this stage, it was still a meaningful boost. Every level up now gave Michael 13 attribute points, 6 from being a high human and 7 from his class. Technically, he was a true human, but Michael could tell this was simply some form of enhanced high human. After observing his mortal god physique progress from his last advancement, however, Michael had developed another theory he felt was closer to the truth. Most likely his last evolution had simply brought forward a title from a future advancement ahead of its natural timing. This would explain why he had attracted a lightning tribulation at rank 3 instead of rank 4 like others. Technically, Michael, who could match late-stage rank 3 supernaturals before his advancement, should not struggle against early-stage rank 4 creatures after advancing. But he could tell that was his current ceiling until he progressed further in other ways. His theory was that the lightning tribulation only came to those who had, or were about to develop, a mortal god physique. Given that the tribulation itself could progress this physique, Michael felt he was not far from the truth. This brought him another question, though. Were other rank 4 supernaturals also at 25% progress in their physique, or were they like the previous him, standing only at the threshold? For that he felt he would need to meet Jester and retrieve the memories extracted from the demonic supernatural's consciousness. Michael leaned back slightly in his chair, fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. His thoughts shifted back to the panel as he focused on his other gain. A class skill. Michael was no stranger to class skills, except this time he was no longer a necromancer. This skill was a core skill of the Death's Heir class. Visit and read more novel to help us update chapter quickly. Thank you so much.